I don't know. We can talk about
any number of things.
Yeah.
All right. So, what's up, y'all? My name's Gus.
My name's Chris.
And this is, well, I guess temporarily called the Anomaly Podcast until we figure out a better name.
Yeah. It's not a bad name.
It's not a bad name. There's already an Anomaly.
There's too many. There's 2 or 3.
There's like 2 of them. 2 of them that I found that are actually active. I think there's another one that's just dead. So, anyways, there's a lot going on in everywhere. So
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, anything in particular that you've been seeing that you think might be worth a gander? Have you been paying attention to what's happening with this? What's his name?
Oh, Salvadorian guy.
Yes, yeah, Salvadorian guy. What's his name?
Yeah, a little bit. I haven't done any
research on that.
Research on it in like my downtime. Honestly, I just haven't had a whole lot of downtime recently. I was watching something yesterday, so I do think that I was
Kilmar.
Yeah. So I do think that I was like slightly misinformed at the beginning. Not that I had the official position, but I think that I was under the assumption that he had attained citizenship. I don't believe that he was, from my understanding, I don't believe that he was a citizen. But he was here, that he did come here illegally, but he was either in the process of asylum or just had received it.
So it's a hot mess.
So I don't know, and depending on how I guess he was officially considered, whether citizen or where he was in the process, has different routes on argument based on like what could have, should have happened. I think at the end of the day, I think most of us can agree that what happened shouldn't have happened the way that it did. But
yeah, so
there are different nuances that I think that people like to argue or bring up based on his status.
So when you look at the traditional media, like the right and left sides, they're both right and they're both wrong. Imagine that.
Wow,
they're picking the things.
Better watch what you say.
Right, they're picking the things that are appropriate for their, I guess,
audience,
the agenda that they're trying to push. When I looked at the details of this, it was a mess. So he came when he was 16, in like 2011 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he came illegally. He did come illegally, and he ended up finding work, and he ended up getting, the way he got caught is he got caught at a Home Depot trying to find work, which is not uncommon.
Yeah, I mean, that would make a lot of sense. Actually.
So he was at a Home Depot trying to find work, which is not uncommon, and he happened to be adjacent to other MS-13 affiliated gang members.
Okay.
Now, so when he got picked up, he got kind of scooped into that. Now, they went through.
He got picked up for work.
No, he got picked up. The police came.
Oh, okay.
There was a police that came. There's a situation where the police came, and then 2 of the guys that were part of the MS-13 ran away, and they ended up dropping some paraphernalia or some kind of something. I think it was drugs or something like that under a vehicle, and so they ended up getting them, and then he got kind of swooped up in that whole scuffle.
The whole mess. Yeah.
And then they found out that he was also an illegal immigrant, and so the police had assumed that he was part of MS-13, but there wasn't any necessarily confirmation of that. Then he went through some legal proceedings, and there was an informant that identified him as a member of MS-13. Actually, he had some real affiliation where he had ranking with the MS-13 organization. So that is what got him into a little bit more of the trouble.
That was at that time.
At that time, yeah. Now there was back and forth. He did get an order to be deported at one point.
The courts issue like a stay or something, like
Well,
he couldn't be deported back to El Salvador.
Yeah, he ended up. Well, later on, he ended up. They gave him. It wasn't asylum. They ended up giving him the ability to stay and work while they worked out his situation, because it wasn't clear like whether or not he was with MS-13 or not MS-13 and whatnot. So they did allow him to stay while they gave him a court date, which again also not uncommon. He in the interim, he ended up marrying a Venezuelan girl.
She was a U.S.
But
citizen.
she was a U.S. citizen, and that's where the citizenship element came into play. Because when you marry a U.S. citizen, then you get to become a U.S. citizen. That's why a lot of you'll see a lot of foreigners will try to marry U.S. citizens for their citizenship.
But there's still a process to obtain that citizenship.
There is, and I don't know what the details are. But pretty much, if you marry a citizen, that's sort of the fast track, right? To becoming a citizen. And then there was, she ended up complaining because there was abuse. So she ended up making a complaint to the police department that he was abusing her physically, and there was domestic issues that was happening. He ended up getting picked up again. He at that time, once they got past the domestic abuse, I believe at that time they opened his case as it related to deportation, and that's when he made a request for asylum, which they denied. There was a request for some other formality. He must have had an attorney at this point to be able to stay, and then he made a request for withholding because he feared for his life in El Salvador.
Sure.
Now, the way the withholding works is it's not that you can't be deported.
You can't be deported back there.
You can't be deported to the place that is essentially that there's a deportation withheld from a specific location, and El Salvador happened to be that location. So when he ended up getting picked up by this last time, I guess they didn't realize that the withholding order was for El Salvador. So my understanding is there's a very small percentage of people who have a withholding order that actually get deported, because it's hard to go to find another country that's going to take them. Like, why would you want to take another country's criminals or whatever, right? Especially if they're considered criminals. Why would you want to do that? So very few countries actually take, those types of deportees. So I guess they didn't realize that the withholding order, because El Salvador opened up their doors and say, hey, we'll take your people. So El Salvador is now a country that's willing to take deportees that have a withholding order that are not from El Salvador. And I guess whatever protocol they went through to send him, he ended up going to El Salvador, because I guess they just figured, what are the chances that the one place of withholding is also El Salvador? So they just sent him there. So the administration was wrong for sending him there. They were not wrong for deporting him. They were wrong for deporting him to that place. You see what I'm saying? So there was a deportation order on him. So he could, by all legal standards, the administration was well within their right to deport him. They just weren't within their right to deport him to El Salvador. So they did mess up, but they didn't completely mess up. He should still be deported. He just, to El Salvador is the wrong place. That's where the problem is. So then, on the right side, you're hearing, oh, well, now they're leaning heavily on that. Well, he's supposed to be deported anyways, and now that he's in El Salvador's hands. But let's be honest. I mean, El Salvador is working in tandem with the United States. If the United States asked for him back, El Salvador would give him back. Like, it's not like
the stupidest argument.
That's a dumb.
We can't do anything about it. You just gave the country $6 million, however.
There's no way.
Whatever you did, there's a quid pro quo in that relationship, and the fact that and I think that it said a lot when they were sitting in the Oval Office, and like you had the president there said, I'm not gonna. What do you want me to do? Pretty much smuggle a felon back into the States. And like nobody's asking you to do that, first of all. And then you've got the president. It's like it's out of our hands. It's like you guys are literally sitting right
next to right.
And all you need to do is ask.
Yes,
right?
Totally.
It is super simple.
It is, and I think that's what's that's the problem. And I think that's the optics of it is so fraudulent, which is really what's upsetting. Like there's a situation where the administration could just say, you know what, you're right. Like we do want to deport him, but we can't deport him to El Salvador. We have to come back and reassess how we're going to do that.
So the case to redeport him was just opened back up, or they put a deportation?
No, he had a deportation order on him. And I guess the withholding may have happened earlier. I don't remember what the timing of that was, but he had a deportation. So he was set for deportation, but because he made the claim that he was at risk for his life if he went back to El Salvador, a judge put a withholding order onto his deportation. So he couldn't be deported to El Salvador.
So this is where I get my lack of knowledge, and I don't know if you've got any more on it, is like the understanding of how that citizenship process works when you marry in, right? If you marry into somebody, do you like what kind of citizenship standing is that? Because they would have first had to revoke, if he became a citizen, they first would have had to revoke his citizenship. Can you do that?
I think what happened, and I have to relook at it because it's just a mess of a story of how it all came together. I think what happened is that he was under the withholding order prior to getting married. So I think they did not approve the citizenship because there was nothing that I've been able to find that identifies him as a citizen.
That's what
So he was married to a citizen, but there's nothing that confirms anywhere that he was an actual citizen. I've not been able to find that. It's not to say that it doesn't exist. I was not able to find confirmation that he got approval as a citizen, which I would understand that they would, they're, even though that's the fast track, they still do interviews and they review all their records and you know what I'm saying?
It's not just an automatic citizen.
Yeah, you got to get approved for that still. So my guess is that the marriage was an attempt. And I don't know if it may have been too
legit marriage,
because he had a kid with her and they're still together, and I think they're still together now. So it seems like it's a legit marriage, and it could be him being married is obviously a way to kind of get him into citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's these other things that this withholding, for example, that's in place, that may be preventing him from becoming an actual citizen. So like my wife actually was confused at one point. We were driving and she was like, well, yeah, he's an American citizen. I was like, what? I've not read that anywhere. Like, well, I was just watching the news and they were saying that he's an American citizen. And I was just like, that's new information. Let me go look up that. Mm-hmm. I was not able to find anywhere that confirmed that he was an American. He was confirmed as an American citizen. I was not able to find that.
Yeah.
But I did find was that he was married to an American citizen, which traditionally that usually means that the foreign person can now become an American citizen very easily because of that through marriage. But I wasn't able to confirm that he actually became an American citizen through that process or any process. I mean, there were even claims out there that he was a born American, and that's clearly not the case.
The case.
So it's just the information out there is what is my phone keeps doing this? Like sometimes it just starts
timers.
No activities.
Oh, mine starts timers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's weird. My wrist will start buzzing for no reason.
No.
Like your timer's going off. I'm like, what timer?
So it's a hot mess, and I think both sides need to cool it. Like they need to cool off. Like, yes, the administration was wrong to deport him to El Salvador, and he has a deportation order in place. So if there's another country that's willing to take him, that's probably where he should be deported to, according to the deportation order. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of people are making the argument that, but he has a family here and so on and so forth. And I understand that. And I really want to be empathetic to that. The problem is that he has like he came here illegally and he has a deportation order based on previous misgivings, which include, even domestic violence to his spouse at one point. Now, It sounds like they worked that out, but, at the end of the day, like, you got to figure out the deportation. Like, if you want to make a case against deportation, then fine, but he still has one on him. You can't just blatantly say, oh, well, he has a family, so he should be able to stay here. Like, you got to first work out that he has a deportation order. Is there any validity to not deporting him? And there could be, but like to argue to just automatically say, oh, well, because he has a family here, he should be able to stay. I don't know that that's necessarily, the right precedent to set.
Well, and my question is that what is the process and what is the due process and the process of that deportation order in? Because let's assume that this is the scenario. He knows that there's a deportation order in, right? So is it just ICE or the police picking him up one day and then just deporting him to wherever that's not outside of El Salvador, right? Or is there a process that dictates that, hey, you've got a deportation order in here, this is where you're going to be deported, right? And this is when you're happening. So I think that
there's no timing on it. So basically the way the deportation order works is that if you get picked up with a deportation order, they can just deport you. That's the way it works. So there's a withholding on his deportation, so he can stay. Basically, the withholding is like, okay, you need to be deported, but we don't have anywhere to send you, and we're not going to hold you in prison.
But what if you get picked, right? So you said if you get picked up, you can be deported. So my question is that it's such a weird scenario, because then my question is like, what would be the reason that you would just randomly be picked up and now you're going to be deported? Right?
I'm trying to remember.
Is there a reason? And then the reason would be, my concern is the whole due process of it happening. Like,
when you say there's a reason, okay, the reason for getting picked up is the fact that there's a deportation order on that person.
Right, but how long has this deportation order been in place?
Years.
So why is it taking years to pick this man up? It's not like they didn't
It's
know
not.
where he
It's
was.
not that there's nowhere to send him. El Salvador just opened their doors to taking deportees. So now they can. So that's where a lot of these deportees that have withholdings that are not El Salvador, they can be sent to El Salvador.
Okay.
Because El Salvador is willing to take them. So if there's a country that's willing to take out like people that are not their citizens, then any deportee that has a withholding order can be sent to that country, as long as that country is not the country that is for the withholding. So technically he should have been deported years ago, and they would have picked him up years ago, but there was nowhere to send him. So what the court said is like, we're not going to hold you in prison because whatever he got caught for wasn't an offense that would denote prison time, right?
Okay.
It wasn't criminal, right? It was just he needed to be deported because he was illegal, and whatever protocols.
Now he's just sitting in a prison in another country.
He didn't qualify for that. Yeah, but he is illegal here. Right? So he has to be removed from here. What they do in the other country is, again, I don't know how much of a responsibility that should be on us, because he's whatever record or whatever he's got going on in another country. If another country is willing to take him, it's not country willing to take them into prison. It's willing to take them, period.
No, yeah, I know. It's not
the
constraint there.
It's not like, any country that's willing to take them and put them into prison is, are you willing to take this deportee? Now, whatever that country does with that deportee, that's not for us to determine as the United States.
So then I think there's where you get into the humanitarian issue around.
Yeah, but
this particular person.
But you can make that case against anyone who comes into the country. And the problem here is, at what point does the humanitarian issue for that individual, like you also got to take into consideration, like, the impact that it has on like the citizens of the country, right? And that's where the really the biggest challenge is like there are two two elements of this that have to be really taken into serious consideration. Is like, what is the impact to the citizens of the country? And we're talking about, right now we're running into all kinds of problems as it relates to economy, as it relates to how the government like manages money, on like how jobs are created here, what jobs are created here, right? So there's all kinds of problems that American citizens have, right? And there are problems that seemingly shouldn't exist because we're the richest country in the world. So we need to solve for those problems. But adding an additional problem of people coming here illegally and being able to effectively behave as American citizens and get the same rights as American citizens without actually being an American citizen doesn't seem to be appropriate, right? So then how do you manage that? So yes, there's a humanitarian element in terms of like, what do you do with someone who's trying to get out? Here's the problem is when he came when he was 16, like if there was like, there's a time limit on when you can apply for asylum. Because the idea behind asylum is that when you come here and apply for asylum, the idea is that you're coming here because you are at risk of your life and you're asking for asylum because where you're coming from, you're worried that they're going to kill you. So you come here and you request asylum. So there's a time limit. Like if you don't request that asylum, if you don't have that asylum request within that certain time
because
limit,
the assumption is you're coming here for that, and so you need to request that.
Correct.
But he came here illegally. So I'm trying to get the timeline down. So he came here illegally. You said that he ended up having. Then he got. What was that you said? So he came here illegally when he was like 16.
Yeah.
Got picked up, mixed up with MS-13 or whatever.
I don't. It's still unclear. It's still unclear about. So there's a couple things. He got picked up with other MS-13 gang affiliated people. It's not clear whether or not they were actually affiliated with each other.
Yeah, and so that's not my question is just like because we were talking about him marrying this person for citizenship, but then you said
that was very recently. That was like in like 2019 or something like that.
And so what happened from when he was legal? So then when they picked him up because of that whole situation, that's when they put out the deportation order?
That was...
it was because of that scenario?
I don't know. He initially went into... From that, he initially went into court proceedings.
Okay.
There was... I guess they had an informant as it related to MS-13.
Who nobody wants to name or...
I'm not sure. I don't know who the details are. But apparently that informant identified him as I don't know what you call that.
13 affiliate or something.
But like a ranking person. Like he had a rank in the MS-13, and it could be a very low rank. I don't know what the ranking systems are.
Sure.
Like a captain or admiral. But he had some rank of some kind that he was designated. That is according to the informant, and apparently the informant was considered to be a trustworthy informant, and enough that a judge agreed that he was. He also had. I think he also had. Missed some court dates for other like infractions. I mean, like other like it seemed like it was like traffic infractions or something. And he never came to them. So then the court said that he was a risk for not coming back. I got to look into it again, but effectively at that time he. You know what? I don't remember the timeline exactly, but I want to say it must have happened. The withholding must have happened before he got married, because he didn't get his citizenship when he got married. Which, if he didn't have a deportation order at that time, and he got married, then the likelihood is that he probably would have gotten citizenship. So my guess is that he had his deportation order prior to that, and he wasn't deported probably because he had a withholding order that prevented the deportation from happening.
Well, the withholding order shouldn't have had any impact on him not being deported because at that time El Salvador wasn't taking deportees.
No, the withholding. So that's not relevant.
What is it? So there's the withholding, not what?
The withholding is you can't be deported to a specific country. It doesn't matter whether they're taking or not taking, because the United States can still send people. I mean, if we wanted to send a plane with,
I thought the wrong side. Nobody was taking deportees at the time. So they had the withholding.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is the withholding is a moot point on whether or not he got deported because there was nobody taking deportees. It doesn't matter. The withholding wasn't the reason why he wasn't being deported.
No, he could have been deported to El Salvador. It doesn't matter whether the country is taking them or not. Like, we can still get rid of them out of our country. It's problematic. It's not easy to do. Like what we did with Colombia.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't want them, and they were like, "You're gonna take them. They're your people." And Colombia was like, "Okay, fine." I mean, they can complain about it.
Yeah. So I mean, then that would be like, okay, so there was so see, that's where I'm just kind of like.
So the withholding was to prevent
him from going to El Salvador.
El Salvador.
So if he's been here for that long and they didn't deport him and they could have deported him, then the question would
arise. No, he had a withholding order, which is why they didn't deport him.
Correct.
Yeah.
But with the span of however long it was from them picking him up to them sending him there, that's what I'm saying. I feel like the due diligence or the due process of making that happen is like the question would be is like he's had this order in for so long,
mm-hmm.
and he hasn't been deported, and now we've got this country here who's willing to take them for monetary value. So we're just going to send this person who has had this out for so long. Why has he had the deportation order out for so long and hasn't been deported?
Because there's not another country that'll take deportees.
But you just said that we could send them regardless. It just is a little bit stickier.
Well,
we can send them out. We can send deportees out regardless.
We can unless they have a withholding order, because that's us. That's our rules.
Exactly.
The withholding order prevents us from sending them to
back to their country.
Yeah. Now we can't just send El Salvadorians to Colombia.
Right. So there is my concern. My concern is that like, hey, you've had this guy. He's had it. We're going to deport him. He's had a deportation order in for years. Okay. Well, why didn't you deport him years ago?
Because of the withholding order.
Exactly. So then if you haven't deported him in 2 years because of the withholding order, then just because this country, now you have this country open, and now you're just going to deport him. In my mind, the question would be is like, oh, well, if he wasn't deported 2 years ago because of a withholding order.
Yeah.
And now the country is willing to take these people. He's El Salvadorian, right? Now they're willing to take them with money, and now we're going to stick them on a plane and we're going to send them there.
Yeah.
My question would be like, well, why didn't we send him there 2 years ago? Oh, because there's a withholding order. Oh, okay. So we can't send him there now.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right.
You know what I
mean? Yeah. The administration was completely wrong in sending them there now.
So that's my whole thing is
the administration was completely wrong in sending him there now. Like that was the wrong decision to make. They completely are in the wrong because they never should have sent him to El Salvador.
Right.
So what the argument is that what could have happened is if, let's say, for example, Colombia decided they're going to take outside people that are not citizens of Colombia. They're willing to take them, right? Deportees, for example. We could then take him back and then send him to Colombia and be like, okay, you're in Colombia now because Colombia is willing to take you. We have the ability to do that. The withholding order doesn't prevent us from deporting him. It prevents us from deporting him to El Salvador.
Okay.
You understand? It's just if there's another country willing to take him, then we would send him there. There's just not another country. And then they made the mistake of sending him to El Salvador. They never should have sent him to El Salvador. That's the problem. And that's why the left is up in arms, rightfully so, because he was sent there incorrectly. Mm-hmm. And now the United States is playing stupid. I'm like, oh, we can't do anything now. Duh. Like that's not the position to take. Like, just say, hey, that was the wrong one. We're gonna need to bring him back.
They don't have the right to do that. They don't have the right. They don't have control.
Yeah, bullshit.
So here's my question too, because I will get into this because this is concerning to me. So what are your thoughts on his comment about bringing this to quote, like I forgot what was like grassroots
American citizens.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's a severe problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a severe problem. I'm not really sure where he's coming from on that. At any time that you remove, so I guess the question is like, are you talking about? There's a couple issues. One, are you talking about removing due process and just sending people to there? Because that is highly problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about using the El Salvadorian prison as an alternative prison option? Right? Because that also has problems, but the problems are a little bit less. Like if someone goes through due process and then you're sending them, like one of the prison options is to go to El Salvador, like that's something that you can have a conversation about. The question then becomes, okay, like from a humanitarian, going back to the humanitarian issue, like are they following at the very least some of the basic humanitarian protocols that we have, here in the United States? And then the question is, to what degree? Because I mean, obviously they're in prison, so we want to be humanitarian to some degree, but they're also in prison. So like, at the very least, some basic humanitarian elements. Are they following some of the basic humanitarian protocols, in that prison, and who is verifying that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's highly problematic for any president to suggest that American citizens should just be sent to a prison outside of our country, outside of our control. I think that's highly problematic in general. Now, again, I don't know if he means like, oh, if someone is just, we don't know what to do with them, or, we just feel like they're a domestic terrorist, so we're just going to send them there without due process. That's a problem. That should never happen under any circumstances. Like every citizen in the United States is eligible for due process. As a matter of fact, every non-citizen is eligible for due process. As long as the problem is that we have a categorization, a terrorist categorization that permits the government from circumventing the due process protocol, which is in and of itself problematic, because who determines who is a terrorist? And the government determines that, right? So we have to be that's a very thin line, like between it being like highly problematic and it may be working. And the problem is it's reliant on whoever is deciding, who is the decider of that status. It's like free speech, right? So who determines what is hate speech, right? Like who determines that? Like I understand the idea behind hate speech and why people are like, oh, hate speech should be censored, and I understand the concept, but who determines what is hate speech? And then if it's all going to be, if it's based on a person identifying what is hate speech, then the person is not going to live forever. There's another person, and that person may be different, and their idea of hate speech may be different. So who determines that? So like when you have a person there's not a clear determination as to how a thing is going to be identified, like that tends to be problematic, because if you're relying on the perspective of an individual or a group of individuals that may change over time, that's not objective, that's subjective. And anytime you have subjective elements involved in making decisions as to where people go or how criminal activity is pursued, like that becomes problematic. It's already, we already have a subjective element in our governance as it relates to like trials, for example, because like when you go into trial, you have to go in front of your peers, and like the whole trial is done in front of peers. Mm-hmm. There's no other way to do that, to be as objective as possible, right? But that's clearly, there's some subjective elements there, because those are people making decisions on whether or not this person's going to be, a criminal or free, or they're going to, whatever the case may be, right? So there are already some elements of that, but you got to find ways to, make that subjective element as minimal as possible. And the best way to do that in, let's say, criminal court is to identify 12 people, so that you have 12 different subjectives, so that by all of them hopefully you get some kind of objective response to identify, oh, we all agree this person is a criminal. We all agree this person is not, right? Whatever the case may be. You try to remove subjectivity from the process. So I have concerns anytime like there is sort of like well, I don't know what you call that. I guess the status when you identify like, oh, well, anyone who fits this status that we're identifying and, as let's say terrorist, for example, well, who determines what that is? Who identifies terrorist?
It could be my misunderstanding, but I was of the opinion that the broad definition of a terrorist was an ideological organization with political motives, the people would hate me if I use the same word to define the word that I'm talking about. But like acts of terrorism, terrorists are those people who
terrorizing people.
They're terrorizing people with the basis of an ideological standpoint and political motive to make changes. That was my general understanding of what's a terrorist under the definition. Not that a definition was provided, but under the pretense and the precedent that they're defining, the administration is defining terrorists right now based on MS-13, then by all accounts, any gang member affiliation should be considered
a terrorist.
Yeah. So Bloods, Crips, any domestic one too. I don't even know. I'm not super knowledgeable on all of the different gang members here, but like that's so it's like, all right. And then the question is like, okay, well, you're not going after
like what kind of affiliation?
What kind of affiliation? Do they have to be? Is a terrorist now defined as gang members who are illegal immigrants or who are not of this country? Like, well,
not only that, but like if like let's say I was a gang member and then I asked you to do something under duress, like are you now
a gang member,
a gang affiliate, right? And then now you're like, I said, hey, I threatened your family to do this thing, and now you.
And that's where the importance of, if I got wrapped up into that and ended up in a situation from a legal standpoint, that's where the importance of due process comes in.
Correct.
Right. Which, I don't think that we're arguing or debating the fact that due process wasn't given in this situation.
Yeah.
I just feel that, and everybody does it, but it's particularly concerning to me that the administration so blatantly uses things to fit its own agenda, to like have its cake and eat it too. You know what I mean?
I think so.
It works here, but not here.
Yeah.
But there's so much hypocriticalness, and it's like they're throwing it out in the open. And
so have you read The Art of the Deal?
Yeah, it was whatever.
Okay. So when
years ago.
Yeah. So in one of the things that he talks about is being unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's kind of one of the big things, just being completely unpredictable. I don't know if this is one of those situations where he's talking to kind of get people. The idea is to say something outrageous so that you can get the moderate version of it. Because if you say the moderate version of it, people are going to argue it, and you have to, you're going to have to come down to something that's way less moderate than what you were hoping for. So, and again, I don't know if that's what he's trying to do, because some of the things that he's saying is just so out in left field. I'm like, what is going on? I don't know. I don't know like what the strategy is. And again, unpredictability, that may be part of the point, is to not understand. I'm interested to see like how this is going to play out, whether or not this whole idea of like, we can't do anything about it for the purpose of the idea is to get, I'm just trying to think like, what would they be like? What would be the logical reason for doing this? Because it doesn't seem logical to me to go through this effort, see that you're circumventing like, court orders, right? Now there's circuit level courts versus Supreme Court, but I think if it went up to the Supreme Court would probably call them back. But circuit level,
there's a problem there too, but
I still think they would. I think
but they could, but they set a precedent. When was it, in 2020? When did they rule on his presidential power? Like, and it's like, it doesn't matter. And like, who's going to enforce that? What if the Supreme Court does rule that they need to bring him back? Who's going to enforce them bringing them back?
What do you mean, who's going to enforce that?
The courts could say that, but how are they going to make him bring him back?
So
that's the problem.
So you're concerned that the court doesn't have enough power?
The court has the power to issue. The court doesn't have the power to enforce. It doesn't have a I'm going to call it department to enforce the laws or the rulings that it gives. That power is held with the executive branch.
So that's
like the Department of Justice and all of these, which he has put people who are very much in line with him.
Sure.
In his views. So
I mean, okay, but you're suggesting that the court, okay, so the whole idea behind our country is there's balance of power, right, between Congress, the executive, and the legislation, executive, and judicial branches. And while the courts may not have the ability to force him to do a thing, they do have the ability to hold him in contempt and even prosecute him for going against their rulings, by going against the law at the Supreme Court level.
But they can't, but they just set the precedent that he has such broad sweeping power as president that his acts that he is taking as president have a high level of immunity. How are you going to prosecute him or hold him accountable when you've just set the precedent that he's acting within the power of the presidency, which is immune from these things?
Is there something specific that you think he would be immune from right now? The argument right now, that he's already done.
Say that one more time.
Is there something specific that that he's already done that you think he should be prosecuted for? That he's going to get immunity?
No, I'm saying in the sense of this deportation thing.
So here's what I'm saying. Here's what I'm saying. None of that has really played out yet, right? Mm-hmm. So we don't know where the boundary is. It's all theoretical at this stage.
You could argue that, and I don't want to go back to the events of January 6th, right? But that was where this whole precedent thing came from. The whole issue was that he incited, or that he had helped incite a riot.
That's in debate,
right? It's in debate, right? Yeah. But that is the argument, and I kind of take the position of like whether or not he directly incited it or passively incited it. It is of my opinion that, like, as the president, what you say and or don't say, or what you do and or don't do, has consequences. And his inaction of that, of him seeing what was happening and helping to bring that back, has consequences. And I'm not going to go into whether or not they were right or wrong, but just the actions and inactions of a president or a person who has that power and who is looked up to as that has consequences, right? So the whole...
have you looked into the January 6th and all the things that happened in there?
I mean, I didn't comb through everything. I just know...
What do you know about that incident?
I know that a large amount of Americans, some of them peacefully protested on the places. Mm-hmm. Some of them went in and, made some destruction inside of it. I know that, somebody died on the other side. I know that there was some...
When you say someone died on the other side, what do you mean?
The protesters.
Uh-huh.
Somebody got shot, right? By the Capitol. I think the Capitol Police shot them. And then there was some Capitol Police that were also assaulted during that.
Did you see the video for that?
I don't know. I saw so many videos so long ago.
So the video for the Capitol Police opened the doors for them, and they let them in.
Okay.
So there's video of the police just kind of almost like a tour, open the door and let them in. The Capitol Police did that. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't sound to me like they were at arms and they broke into the front door. Now,
no, so they didn't break into the front door. They did some destruction.
They did do damage,
destruction.
Yes.
And I would argue the fact that if you took a look at the amount of I'm not going to call them rioters. I'm going to call them protesters, just because I don't want to get into the semantics of it. But it is of my opinion that, if you take a look at the amount of protesters coming in who are banging at the doors or beating up again or whatever it is, and the amount of Capitol Police that were there, I don't know, man. I could see like the captains and stuff being like, hey, open the door. I mean, it's the people's house too, right? I mean, that's another argument. But it's like, what are you going to do if they're banging and beating on the doors and you're going to open them because you're kind of fearing for your life, or you've got concerns about safety or whatever it is, unless somebody opens fire or does something? I mean, I can see that being an issue, but I don't necessarily know. I don't think that we hang on the fact that they opened the door for them as a reason to justify what happened.
I'm not saying that that's justification for what happened, but I want to be clear that what we think we saw is not. It's not clear that what we think we saw is the truth, and what was reported on that is the truth.
So, what are your concerns around what you saw and what was?
So I think that the people who did damage to the property, I think they should be prosecuted for the damage they did. Right. Okay. I do think that that's the case. I think that I do think I was very surprised that if they had a shutdown of the building, that they should have left it shut down. I was also surprised that it took so long for the Capitol Police to even arrive in the first place, if they were really concerned about everyone falling. The president's not the only one who can call the Capitol Police. All of Congress has access to contact the Capitol Police. So why is it that like the Capitol Police did not arrive until so much later? Like they shouldn't have even gotten to the doors. We're talking about the House of Representatives. Like this is the Capitol building. Like if you can't secure the Capitol building, like how is we're in the United States of America and we can't secure our own Capitol? That seems a little odd to me. It's a little strange that our own Capitol building, where Congress does its business, like cannot be secured. That's very strange to me. I find that very, very surprising, considering all of the capabilities of our police and military forces. Like we have a very capable, whether you agree with their methods or not, we have a very capable police force all across the nation. And in the Capitol, they probably are some of the most capable. And that they were unable to secure that building, that's really surprising to me. That's really suspect to me. So I'm not saying that there were not people in that protest that were wrong, but there were definitely players that we know for sure that were part of the federal government that were a part of the protesters that were inciting violence. We know that. There's clear evidence of people that were federal players that were in that group trying to incite violence. Why would they be doing that? That seems really weird.
Well, I mean, my question then would be were they just of that political mindset and affiliation, and they were doing that on their own volition, and they just happened to be federal people doing that, but they were expressing their they were expressing their First Amendment or protest or whatever.
Let me be very clear about how federal workers work, right? You do not have the liberty to speak your mind. Like you have to be apolitical publicly as a federal employee. You do not have the liberty to espouse certain political positions or anything. You're supposed to be a neutral player.
Sure.
And they watch that. So a federal employee just going out there like saying their rights to whatever, that's not a thing.
There's a lot of things that weren't a thing before this.
I'm just saying it's way too suspect that there's that many federal people that were a part of that were inciting violence, that they knew they were being videotaped, and they were a part of that whole process. That's just way too suspicious to me.
I mean, I think there's a lot of things that go into play. I mean, I would argue that the herd mentality comes into a huge play on that. I would also say
I would agree with that. But who is inciting the violence? And if you look at the video shows multiple federal employees. These are people that work for the federal government. These are people that work as a part of not just any federal employees. I'm sorry. These are people that work as part of the FBI, right? That are involved in that inciting violence. Like there are multiple scenarios where you identify multiple FBI agents that are inciting violence. Like that's a little suspect to me. Now, were there bad players in there? I'm sure there were. But why would the FBI be putting its own people into that mix to incite violence? Why would they be doing that?
That's assuming you're taking the assumption that they did that, though.
They did do that.
Put their people in there specifically to incite violence.
Okay.
Okay, so
let me ask you a question. You have FBI agents that are in the mix, dressed as civilians, and they're inciting violence. Are you suggesting that they were there of their own volition, even though that is not a position? So most federal employees tend to be more liberal than they are conservative. But you're saying that they were willing to risk their jobs. These are federal jobs, FBI, like these are career jobs. They're willing to risk their jobs to incite violence. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if they are or not. I don't have the information to be able to make a ruling against that. I'm simply playing the devil's advocate, as others on the other side of the aisle like to play and make deep state accusations on stuff. I'm simply saying that they could, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but there hasn't been any evidence to that contrary, just like there hasn't.
What do you mean there hasn't been any evidence to what?
There hasn't been any evidence that the FBI or the administration or the government specifically put them in there to do this. There hasn't been, there's no evidence that says, hey, they weren't doing this on their own volition. They weren't doing this on their own principles, regardless of how out of the box it may seem. There's been a lot of out of the box stuff that has just been happening. And I'm not saying that it wasn't done on purpose. I'm just saying that there hasn't been any evidence that it was or wasn't. So it's like we can make the assumption.
No, I know that, but you're making the assumption. You're on the other side of the argument, making the assumption that these folks were coming in to essentially assault the House of Representatives.
No, I'm simply stating the fact that regardless of who it was, in the moment, right? This is all post stuff, right? So this is all information that we got after the fact.
Yeah.
In the moment in which it was happening. Nobody knew if it was regular civilians, if it was FBI people, if it was, and the president, the whole movement was in support of the president and in support of this notion that it was a stolen election, right? So it was all in support of that. And the president at the time, seeing it all unfold, remained silent. Regardless, he didn't know if it was, we'll say that he didn't know if it was FBI people doing it on purpose as a deep state or if it was his people.
Right.
But he remained silent, seeing that happen as things happen. It is my opinion that you, as the president, your actions, whether you take action or don't take action, have consequences. And as the leader, the sitting president, I would expect that you make a statement earlier than way later than he did to help address that situation, which he didn't do. That's my problem with his leadership and his motives on what he does. What we're talking about on whether or not it was a deep state thing that, they put in place specifically to create these events for the post stuff. That's a whole nother topic of debate or argument that we could go down a rabbit hole in. You're talking about whether he made the right decision as to whether to say something at the right time. Yeah, but he also, to my understanding, if I remember correctly, he also withheld support or sending, or maybe that was somebody, and I thought it was him, and then my memory could be incorrect. When they asked for support, or when somebody offered their support, was it not the Coast Guard? What's the other one? National Guard? The National Guard offered their support. They rejected it, seeing things happen. So it's like, why would you reject additional support? That was the Capitol Police did that. The Capitol Police rejected it? Yes. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. I didn't remember who it. In any event. But that's my point. Like that's what's so weird about this whole scenario about what happened with January 6th. Sure. Is that all of Congress has access to be able to contact the Capitol Police. It's not just the president.
all of Congress.
Mhm.
Anyone from Pelosi has, I'm sure, the captain's telephone number.
Yeah, in her cell phone.
Yeah.
Or beeper.
Yeah.
She might still have a beeper.
Yeah, she might have a beeper. Right? Like all of Congress has access to the Capitol Police, but they took such a long time to get there. And then when the National Guard said, "Hey, we can come in and help," the Capitol Police were like, "No, we got this." But then they didn't arrive till almost super like late. Mm-hmm. And when they got there, they're like, "Oh, let's open the door and let you in." Why would you do that? Mm-hmm. That's a whole other conversation we can have.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, it's very suspect that that's the case. I'm not gonna. I could agree with you that President Trump probably should have said something earlier. That he should have, made the decision to make an announcement earlier about the whole situation. The fact that he didn't do that, does that for me translate that he was inciting violence? I don't think so.
No, so I think we got off topic of the reason why I brought that up. I didn't want us to get into whether or not he incited the violence or whether or not the events happened. What my point was is that the Supreme Court, based on the events of January 6th, mm-hmm. made the ruling that the things that he did were part of his power, his presidential powers.
When you said things that he did, I don't understand.
When he said what was the?
He didn't do anything as it relates to that.
No, so they were prosecuting for like inciting the violence and like his. I can't remember what it is. I'm gonna have to come back.
We'll have to come back to that.
Let's come back. But anyways, the precedent of the ruling was that he was exercising rights within his presidential powers and thus could not be prosecuted
for that.
But the way that they ruled was that it was just such a broad swath of presidential powers. So it's like anything and everything that he does. And when I say he, I don't mean just Donald Trump. I mean any president.
Yeah.
Has just given so much power back to them that where it's like they could do so many things and argue that they're acting in the capacity of the president,
the
executive, and now cannot be prosecuted for anything else outside of that. So it's just that's a challenging precedent that they sent.
I would say that we would have to see some of that play out because I mean, there's all kinds of theories of the direction that can go in. I'd be interested to see how that played out because if he ultimately did some valid criminal behavior and he wasn't prosecuted, I would imagine that there would be enough of an uproar from the people that would sway the judicial to take some action. I would imagine that that's the case, assuming that we still have the right to, the First Amendment right, Second Amendment right, all that good stuff, because there's all kinds of theories of where that could potentially go. But I mean, our government is kind of built for checks and balances. So, and historically, when we've seen the checks and balances have to come into play, they have generally worked. They're, obviously not always working perfectly, but, the judicial has come in and done stuff that, like with Nixon and whatnot. The Congress has come in as it relates to, making sure that stuff is appropriately being put into law or making adjustments to any laws that were put into place that were inappropriate from before or whatever the case may be. Like we kind of have a system that's designed like that. Now, I will say I'm not a huge fan of how, for example, like executive orders are now being used, right? Because they weren't supposed to be built for that. Like, I think over the last, I would say 3 decades, the executive orders have been utilized more and more to be sort of like let me change. Let me fix something in the way that I think it's going to work.
Legislature,
right? Is what So I'm not a fan of that. I don't think that's the right way the executive orders should be utilized. On the flip side of that, I do see that there are a lot of problems with the way government is being managed because there's a lot of political dollars in the system that has corrupted the system. And, the question is, and the right is suggesting that, oh well, Trump is not corruptible because he's a billionaire already, right? So the only thing that he really cares about is his legacy. That's the argument that they're making. And the left is saying, oh, he's one of them. So how can you say he's not corrupt? He's one of the ones that are the corruptors. So then, of course, he's going to be doing everything that's going to be in the benefit of the big billionaires and whatnot. So it's hard to know where the truth is in that, because right now what he's doing is not helping people in the stock market, which is where the billionaire class and the millionaire class live. That's where they get hurt the most, right? In the stock market. So then, you know, there's a case that the right is now making, that you see he's not doing. He's actually hurting the millionaire class. Maybe he has a big, I don't know, maybe he has some mastermind, master chess move that he's going to make that's going to ultimately make billionaires even richer. Who knows? But there are arguments against, there are arguments on both sides of him as it relates to his unpredictability and his the things that he's doing with executive orders. And some people are liking what he's doing and some people are hating what he's doing. What I don't know, what's hard for me to discern, is what his motivations are. And I think that matters. But it's hard to know what that is, because he's historically not been a pleasant person to listen to. But he's doing things that, like, some of the things that he's doing seem to be, they strike me as like an effort to make the system better. So, like, for example, the whole Doge thing, like, conceptually, I think that's a good play. I think that's a good idea. You have a system, a department that's basically, their role is to go through all the department's budgets and identify, like, where is there, like, terrible spending.
Yeah, but the counter argument to that is that, you know, and I haven't gone real deep in it, but the counter argument, some things that I've heard and seen, is that, you know, they're stating that they've cut and saved all of these monies from these different programs, that there really wasn't any savings from, because, like, the contracts had already been paid out, but they used that to inflate the numbers of the savings dollars.
So I think that part of that is that so typically what happens in,
or they're double counting contracts.
Well, typically what happens with government contracts is that and different departments is they have a and it's very standard practice, is a use it or lose it budgetary system. That's the way that most.
I mean, that's the way most things. That's why if you get a budget, you want to use the budget, because if you don't use the budget, you'll get your budget cut.
Correct.
Next, right? So you're incentivized to.
But that's only. But that only happens in governmental systems. Like, it doesn't happen in private industry, right?
Well, in some cases, because some people want their, like.
Yeah, you can't frivolously just spend money just to use your budget.
Yeah, you've got to find. Yeah, you can't do it so frivolously, but you are incentivized to find ways to spend that budget effectively.
Effectively is the key, right? So, like, in government systems, it's a use or lose it mentality. So effective is not necessarily a part of the equation. It's like, if I don't use the money, then I'm going to lose it. I'm just going to lose the money. And it doesn't matter whether or not there's a need for the thing. I want to make sure that I have this money for next year, right? So, you know, if they say that they're cutting something that's already been spent for this year, for example, but they're cutting that for next year, well, they're saying that because the likelihood is that same amount of money is going to be spent next year, because that's the way the system works. So they're saying, hey, we're not going to use this anymore. So that's why they're counting money that's already been spent. Because they're saying for next year's budget, you're not going to be able to have that money available for you to spend on this frivolous whatever the thing is, right? So I think right now they're estimating at about 100 billion, which is less than they initially had touted. But still, 100 billion is not nothing, which is still something. It would be nice for it to be closer to 2 trillion, because obviously
that would be a major impact. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, the other thing that we got to take into consideration is that, like, our monetary system, you know, we are in severe debt. It's quite a problem. it's not a small problem. It's quite a big problem. It's
Yeah.
actually surprisingly underreported, in my view. People talk about it in like these sort of theoreticals, but not really getting into the nuts and bolts of like, hey, listen, we like country guys, like we need to stop like the way that we're spending money. Our money management is terrible. Like we got to figure this out, because if we don't, like the dollar is going to be in severe decline. And it's not unusual for, it's not unusual for money to, go into decline and another form of money go into the first position. That's very normal.
Yeah, I mean
that
British just makes sense.
The British pound used to be the money of choice.
Yeah.
Right? It
used to cost more dollars to get the pound.
Yeah. Well, it still does, but it used to be the reserve currency.
Yeah. Well, I remember when the British pound and the U.S. dollar got into parity with each other a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, so the euro.
Like 1 for 1. That's what it was. The euro was.
Yeah.
Not the pound. It was the euro.
Yeah.
Because it used to be, I remember, it was like, when I went to Europe back in like 2017, it was
almost
like $1.36. It was like $1.36 to get €1.
Yeah.
And then I feel like it was closer to 20. I think it was like a little bit before COVID. You saw it like the euro started getting closer, and then like we actually hit like pretty much a 1 for 1. I think the euro is less than the dollar.
I don't know.
I don't know actually.
It's been
back and forth, but I remember seeing that. I'm like, damn. I'm like, I still got euros in my house, and I'm like,
these are worth less now.
Yeah, worth less.
No, I mean, I think that I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
I'm sorry, I went into euros. You were talking about pound. We were talking about currency switching positions because of those.
Oh, yeah. So that happens, right? If the dollar loses its position as the reserve currency, that has a detrimental effect on our money, because our money is fiat. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that backs our money other than the pride and glory of the United States.
Yeah, right? Other people wanting to use it.
So, the trust that's put into the dollar is really important now. So I do think there are drastic measures that need to happen. I do think there is, whether or not this is the tariffs is the right way to do it. There's definitely trade deficits that need to be addressed, and there's definitely different trade arrangements that need to be made with other countries in order for there to be a better balance, so that we are actually a producing nation, which we've been really bad at as of late, and that other nations are, that we can build products and actually compete in other countries, which right now we have a hard time with. Now, part of the problem is that our dollar is worth so much. That's part of the problem, to be honest, right? Is that the dollar is worth so much more than everyone else's money. So when we send material goods to other countries, like it's so much more expensive compared to what they can produce or what they can get from other countries, because our dollar is worth so much more. So for us to send stuff out of our country as a material good, it's expensive. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So like we do need to figure that out. Whether or not this whole tariff situation is the right way to do it, I don't know if that's the right answer. It could work out. Right now it's kind of up in the air as to whether it's going to work out. But I do think something drastic has to happen. And the fact that I would say that because something drastic has to happen, and we can't get a politics as usual happening in order for us to fix this. I mean, that is arguably it's not an unreasonable position in my view to say, well, I don't know that I agree with everything he's doing, but he's definitely not following politics as usual. He's definitely taking drastic measures. And then the question then becomes, is it going to work? But any drastic measure is going to be drastic. It's going to be something that's going to be scary, and it's going to be a bunch of people are going to be like, well, this is going to be a catastrophe. Like anything that's drastic that you take, any drastic measure that you take, it's going to appear to a lot of people, and very rightly so, that it could be a catastrophe. It could go very wrong. So are there other political figures that would be willing to take drastic measures in that same capacity? I've not seen any, and that's I guess where the only reason why I'm kind of in a wait and see position with the Trump administration. I'm not agreeing with some of the stuff he's doing for sure. There's a lot of stuff he's doing. I mean, I don't know why they're holding tight on this whole Kilmar situation. That's so stupid. I don't understand that.
I mean, well, in my opinion, I think they're holding tight on that because the administration, I think that they don't like I feel like they've said, right, that they made him, that there was an error, an administrative error taking him back. But I think that then by them bringing him back, it's counterproductive to the narrative that they're spinning, which is he's a gang member, illegal alien, and 13. And if they bring him back, even under the I don't know the word I'm looking for.
The withholding?
Yeah, even though they did it incorrectly, for them to bring him back, the optics are going to be that they've brought back an illegal alien who is also, because of the narrative they're spending, a member of MS-13, a terrorist organization. And then, arguably it's going to give the left fuel or just a position to stand on, right? And so I think that I personally think that that's it. And I think that, Trump is a prideful guy and he's not taking any losses or any responsibility that he doesn't necessarily have to, that would be against his agenda. And that could be argued for any sitting president. This just happens to be a very high profile issue. And we're talking about a specific one person individual, right? Which is hard. And I think this would be a different conversation if he happened to be a U.S. citizen, but he's not. So it's like they have more, I don't want to say a leg to stand on, but they can default, like whatever the press secretary, she always goes back to the same thing. She does a great job of pivoting back to things whenever this gets brought up. I mean, I don't agree with what she pivots to necessarily, but she's really good at pivoting it back, and she's just really good at, like, she just says this. Like, I'll give her credit to the fact that she's probably the most consistent messenger in that administration. Like, she says the same shit over and over. Like, she just walls it back. I mean, I feel like, like I don't know. What is the guy? I'm not a fan of the tariffs. I think that specific tariffs could be appropriate. I see that. Where was I going? Where was I going with this? Just lost my train of thought. It's just like, come back.
Did the tariffs have something to do with what, like, how the administration is handling, like, governance kind of deal, or?
No, I was going to. Literally, it's going to come back and hit me like a brick here in a minute.
Well, let me.
I digress because.
We can. I mean, the tariffs are. That's an interesting dynamic of what's happening with the tariffs.
I know where I was going with that.
Oh, good.
So, you say you don't know if it is. So it's like. I think a concern that I have, and we can see it play out, but it's definitely one that just keeps getting repeated back, is like, you kind of mentioned the checks and balances that we have. And I don't know if you see it the same way that I'm seeing things, but I do have a concern around, you mentioned the checks and balances, and the checks and balances are only good if the checks and balances exist. And we can't say that the checks and balances are inherent just because we have a 3-branch government system, right? So, and I'm using the tariffs just kind of like as kind of like, I'll come back to it as the where I'm going to wrap this around, but it's like, you've got the administration. Like, I've got a real concern around the consolidation of power, whether or not that stays with Trump or it just becomes consolidated to that particular branch, right? But we've got, you say that there's the checks and balances, but Trump has appointed in my opinion, yes men to very high key positions of his executive branch. Who?
Like who?
I mean, even Patel.
Okay, hold on. So, even if I gave you the Patel's a yes man,
mm-hmm.
like he came in and he captured like 5 of the top 10 most wanted people.
That's fine. But I think that
it's unfair to just say that he's a yes man and then he comes into his role and then he literally takes out like 5 of the top 10 most wanted in the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
And I'm not saying that that's not a good thing, nor am I not saying that he shouldn't be credited for that. But the concern that I have is that he has got these people in for more or less who are not going to challenge him on things.
You think so?
Who would you
say? Who would you say that wouldn't challenge him?
I would argue. And I used to like Tulsi. I would say even Tulsi. I would say.
You think Tulsi Gabbard wouldn't challenge him?
Just based on the confirmation hearings, when they weren't answering questions, the feeling that I've got is just a lack of clarity in answering questions and pivoting and not taking positions. We've kind of had this conversation, I think, before on those confirmations, right? And then you have I just feel that there's like a deterioration of the checks and balances, because he's got this very broad presidential capacity based on the Supreme Court ruling that we just kind of talked about a little bit earlier. In my opinion, he's got Congress, whether you've got some people who don't agree with some of the things, but nobody's willing to like really go tit for tat and challenge those things. On the right, I mean, the left is always going to, because they're on the other side.
I mean, right? That's usually short-lived. I mean, if it goes too far, I mean, usually he doesn't get more than, most presidents don't get more than 2 years of having a Congress that's, in their favor.
Sure. Well, and we've got to see, but he's also apparently, I mean, we'll see what happens, because there's a lot of people who were in his camp before who aren't in Trump's camp now.
Yeah. Because
of the whole tariff, just because of the shit that he's done in the first 100 days.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he makes these things like, so I'm just going to circle all the way back. So he goes back to, so Powell, right? He's in the news now, right? Mm-hmm. I personally think that Powell's done a great job. Trump is the one who appointed him in his first term.
Mm-hmm.
And, was it 2 weeks ago when the whole tariff thing happened, right? And then he said, oh no, we're not going to do the tariffs anymore. We're putting it on a pause. Like, what was the guy's name who was sitting in the congressional committee talking, and he was the one who led foreign trade. I guess it's foreign trade person.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't even know that was happening, and they like literally kind of like threw him. They made this change and didn't tell him ahead of time who he's supposed to be the lead on that stuff for foreign trade. And I just think of that as I take that back to like our line, like my line of business, where it's like, if I have a customer or a client and we're working through something, I don't want to find out through a third party before me. Like, it makes me feel like they don't really know. They don't really have a plan, because they just made a quick decision from like Friday to a Monday or Friday to a Tuesday, whenever it was, and then the guy who's on the point lead person of that had no idea that happened. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what kind of conversation, like, you made that decision without your key point person who leads that part of that. So then that gives me concern. And then Trump liked Powell and didn't have anything to say about Powell, was kind of supportive of Powell up until, was it Friday or Thursday, whenever Powell gave his remarks on
interest rates
and how tariffs, how they see tariffs impacting it. And
they have to wait and see.
They have to wait and see, but they did make the comment that like tariffs will have inflationary effects.
Yeah.
And because of the higher or larger amount of tariffs than were previously expected or assumed, the inflationary effects of those tariffs are likely to be larger. And it was like,
yeah, but everybody knew that. That's not unknown.
Yeah, but he said that, and then now you've got Trump who's saying, "Oh, he's slow to it. He's trying to discredit him through like his Truth Social stuff. Like he wants on Friday." The administration said that they were looking into ways that they could fire him, and then on Monday, Trump's like, "No, we're not looking into that. We're not going to fire him. We're like kind of like backtracked on that." And so in my mind, I'm like, dude, it's like, Powell's role, as it should be, is supposed to be very independent of politics, insulated of the politics,
sure.
Which it should be. But like, I feel that just says so much more about what he's trying to do. He wants yes people in the positions that have power and that can make changes. So whether or not you think that the people who are currently in the positions are yes people, I would point out just by how he talks and how he is supportive of people when they're in his corner, and then aren't supportive of them when they're not in his corner on what he wants to be. The people who he's put in, at least at the moment, are seen more as yes people who's going to let him move without friction.
I hate to be in the position of defending Donald Trump.
My job is done.
I guess my comment to that is, to his credit, a few things. If he's looking for yes people, why bring on a Tulsi Gabbard and an RFK Jr. into your cabinet when those were adversaries? Mm-hmm. They have historically been adversarial towards him. Like, there's no history of them being yes people to him or to anyone. They're independent thinkers historically. Like, why bring on those two people into your cabinet if you're looking for yes people, as an example?
So personally, I think it's because, this is just me, I don't want to say speculating, right? I guess maybe a little bit, but like, as of my opinion, if I had to give you a broad sweeping answer, because I haven't had conversations with him personally, is RFK Jr. has been on the fringe of the left Democratic Party. He hasn't been able to get anywhere. He hasn't really been able to do anything. He hasn't been able to move up in the ranks of government the way that he feels that the way that he feels he needs to in order to make impactful change. Right? Trump has given him that opportunity. Why?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of Trump supporters share views that RFK has, and that what RFK is focused on doesn't necessarily conflict with the main agenda of what Trump is trying to do.
Yeah,
but
he's not a yes person. Your argument is that he's bringing yes people around him.
My argument is that he has provided something to him and put him in a position that he's been wanting to get into, to where there is a sense that he is. I would argue that Trump has leverage on him because he is in his pocket.
I don't understand how you're getting there. How are you jumping to that conclusion? Like, historically, he's not been that. He's been adversarial historically. Like, how do you jump from he's been an adversary this whole time, and then now he has an opportunity to be, let's say, on his he invites him to be on his cabinet?
So I could
why would you do that if you're looking for a yes person?
So you pick RFK Jr., you pick Tulsi Gabbard, who are on the opposite party and who are now here, and we're talking about whether or not they're yes people. But then let's look at JD Vance, and let's look at Marco Rubio, who were completely against him 4 or 6 years ago and had these positions, and now their positions have completely changed, right? Like, I mean, Donald Trump humiliated Marco Rubio and even talked terrible about his wife and stuff. And now Marco Rubio couldn't be closer to the support of Donald Trump. It is of my opinion that it is all about power. That's one big issue that we have in government is power, right? And so when you give these people the opportunity to get in positions of power, and the one person who put them there is your boss, or however you want to be, like, there is a sense of owing. So like but by that argument, anyone he puts into that position is a yes person. That negates
like, oh, I'm specifically finding yes people. It's like anyone I put in this is going to be a yes person. Then you can just make the argument that any president that puts anyone in any power, everyone around them is a yes person. Like that's the role. That's what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that you've got people, everybody who has filled, those 4 people who have filled his cabinet.
You understand what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying.
Like you can't like it's not fair to say that, oh well, because he put them in power, they are now obliged to do whatever he says. Well, you can make that case against every president that put anyone into any position at any time in the past. And therefore, every president is surrounded by yes people because they all owe him because he put them into power.
Yeah, but I would point out the fact that other presidencies, both Republican and Democrat, who put these people in power and put them into their positions, when they had opposing viewpoints, the president didn't directly attack their credibility, didn't attack their ability to perform or their thing or try and discredit them. This president does that. Mm-hmm. He's shown that in past things. So when I see that, I say, okay, well, they have to be yes people in some capacity right now, or they either share the same views or they're willing to not push back as hard against those views because of who he is.
Can I just?
I don't know why I'm trying to track this.
This is one of the things that I actually have to give credit to Trump on, is that every past president that has put people into their cabinet, they put people that were, if they're on the Democrat side, they would put people that were staunch Democrats that were party line people to fill these roles. If they were Republicans, they would identify staunch Republicans that were party line followers of that party and put them into those positions. Donald Trump brought in people that were not party line at all. As a matter of fact, Tulsi Gabbard is an independent. RFK, these are perfect examples. Mm-hmm. RFK is still a liberal. He's still like a classic liberal. He considers himself a Democrat. Like he only went independent because the Democratic Party basically ousted him. Yeah. You know what I mean? But he still considers himself like a classic liberal Democrat. Mm-hmm. So like these are people that are outside of the rails of the Republican Party, which Donald Trump is a part of. He didn't bring in other Republicans to fill those roles. He filled in those roles with people that are outside of his party, which when was the last time that happened? I think it's a hard case. I have to say, it's a really hard case to make that he's surrounding himself with yes people when he's bringing in people that are specifically in either a party that opposes him or he comes from a party that opposed him and is now independent and is not affiliated directly with the Republican Party. Now, I think Tulsi Gabbard may be considering becoming a Republican or whatever the case may be. Maybe she already has. I'm not sure. But she certainly doesn't come from a position of like staunch like Republican values.
No, Tulsi Gabbard left the Tulsi Gabbard left the Democratic Party because of the far left woke wing of the Democratic Party that was taking control, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's not ridiculous that she left, but it was ridiculous that the party went there. Yeah. And I mean, so these are just the feelings that I have and based on like what I'm looking at. And like, it's funny that I'm sharing this on the podcast because I don't like to spread, not a fan of conspiracy things. Mm-hmm. And I hear conspiracy things on the right side, but it's really just a feeling, and just it's hard for me to pinpoint like specific like this is what it is. It's just like I feel like when I take a look at the whole field, like just what's been happening, that's just kind of like what I see. Like I do have this really big concern of the erosion of our democratic republic. Do I need to be
constitutional
republic?
Yeah.
Sorry,
it's still a democracy, but it's a constitutional republic democracy.
Because of because of the presidential power that was, or the powers of the presidency that was kind of established with the Supreme Court's ruling 2 years ago, and then with the current president pushing so much on where the limitations of his powers are. And I just see these little small, and people think it's like, oh, we're not an authoritarian country. We're not, these things. And it's like, well, my concern is like, I don't, every single time that a government has switched over to that or moved into some like authoritarian regime or a concentration of power, it gets chipped away a little bit at a time. And then the next thing you know, you're just here. And I just see, in a sense, I see that happening. Like I see that happening with him trying to expand his presidential power. I see that happening with him trying to discredit people that he has either put in place when they don't agree or it's working against the agenda. I see that with the talks about him, looking into a third term. It's not necessarily.
So he's
not looking into it, but it's
other people.
Other people are said that. I see that,
but that has nothing to do with him.
No, but it has to do with the. I don't want to say the infrastructure, just the environment that has been built around that. Like there's people who are in that camp who are trying to expand his ability to have that power, whether that's him or not. And I'm not going to lie, part of me thinks that it's not him not trying, but he's also gotten good from his first term to this term and knowing how to play the politics of it. So he hasn't denied it, but he hasn't not approved. He hasn't denied it, but he hasn't said it either. He's just kind of like, well, there's people doing it, and we'll just see what happens. I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on the right now, right? But then we've got a Republican Party, the Republicans in Congress, who are very much, maybe we haven't gotten to the fringe on where they want to push back, but I would argue that they very much are just, following his lead on things. And I don't know, maybe it's not happening, but I think that it's detrimental for us not to keep that in the forefront of the mind, that there are things moving in a direction to where powers are getting consolidated, and whether he gets a third term or he doesn't, or whether it happens with him, but the precedent of the consolidation of all of this stuff, I feel is going to have a detrimental impact to
when you say the consolidation of power, what are we talking about here?
Like through the executive orders, through what he's pushing, like being able to do, what was the thing? What is this? Like birthright citizenship, like trying to get, like, just putting things out there that is just testing the waters on what he can do. So, and that's concerning to me. Not that like presidents don't put stuff out there that may push against, right? Because Biden did this too. Biden did this with trying to, with a stroke of a pen, cancel student debt and shit like that, right? But it's just at the magnitude at what he's doing, and
that he's doing it so much.
It's so fast. Like he's just flooding the system with all of these things that he can or can't do. Meanwhile, he's doing it. Like he fired a whole bunch of federal employees and stuff that he didn't have the power to do, but he still did it. And it's like the courts are slow. So it's like, meanwhile, things are happening and the courts are trying to catch up. It's just, I don't know, man. It just does not. And maybe it's all good, right? Maybe it's just a shakeup that everybody talks about. And maybe it's the concern around it's so far off of what the status quo is. It's just that we're still a young country, man. We're like 400 years. We're only 400 years, and like we've seen,
well,
are we four? Is it 400?
No.
Yeah, no.
Not as a country.
1776.
1776 is when
that's when we declared our independence.
So
I guess technically we weren't an official country.
Yeah.
No, 1776 was the.
Was that the Declaration of Independence?
That was the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, maybe that's what it was.
Yeah. So I was gonna say 400. Yeah, for like 400 years. What time is it?
I should know that. You got to get out of here?
No. I just wanted to. You kind of like looked at that and it made me look at the time, and I just wanted to be like, I don't ever want to leave with you guys. We could talk about it. Let me put in an order of Chipotle. Real quick.
We could totally have lunch after this. That's funny.
I just
248 years. Yeah, I knew it wasn't. It's
248.
Yeah, so it's because the Declaration of Independence was 1776. So we're in 20. Yeah, that makes sense. We're in 2021. So yeah, 400 years is not right.
1776. Oh yeah, that was right. Okay, 1886, 19. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, my math was.
I was like 400 doesn't sound right.
Bad. Okay, so we're even younger than that, right? And I think.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish
I was just going to say, I think that people take for granted that we're always going to have this democracy, or that we're always going to have this type of government. And I think that we've seen with other countries, with other rules of law. I mean, Rome was the strongest for fucking how long, and then it fell, right? And that was ruled by an emperor, which I'm not insinuating that we need to go that way. But this is definitely a very new form of governance that we have pioneered, and I think that we just as Americans, more or less, more than not, just kind of take it for granted that we're always going to have these things. And we tend to take that position, and then I want to say turn a blind eye, but we just don't keep our eye on the small things that could really change that.
Here's my thought on that. I think the opposite is true.
Oh my God, excuse me.
I think the very fact that all of this is happening is making people more attentive to what's happening in governance. And for me, this is all a stress test, which I don't have a problem with. If we have if this system of government is what we think it is, it should be stress tested, and the stress test should reveal where the cracks are so that we can fix them. We have a government, the way that our government was essentially put together was specifically designed to be stress tested. We've never had to really test the boundaries of what that means. This to me is a stress test. I think the more stuff like this happens, the more people start paying attention to what's going on in governance so that we can identify where we need to make adjustments. The good thing
specifically, I just want to make sure I got clarity on when you're saying like this is a stress test. What do you feel specifically is being stressed and tested, I guess?
Well, to your point, the to what extent does the executive have power? To what extent should Congress have power? To what extent should the judicial have power? Right? What are their roles, and to what degree can they impact the other roles of the other branches? Right? So I would argue that the Constitution was written in a way to be able to handle this kind of stress, and it's going to bow. And sometimes in that bow, you're going to see scary things because you're like, holy crap! If it goes too far, it's going to be Emperor Trump, right? If it goes too far, it'll be Emperor Trump. So our role as citizens of the Republic is to identify to our representatives like, hey, that's too far. We need to adjust that, right? So that we have our representatives coming back and pushing back, right? Like if there, for example, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in our system is there's too much money in our system.
Oh, 100%. I think that if we took the money out of the system tomorrow, 99.9% of the problems are going to go away.
I don't know about that.
I don't know about that. That's a high percentage.
But a lot of them.
A lot of them.
Sure.
Like, it would be so much easier to make changes, reform, and be
Correct.
representative of the people
Correct.
instead of the special interest groups
Correct.
that control.
So I think that is a part of the equation that also is being stress tested right now. They've gone on under the radar for a long time, and now that's starting to come to fruition, and people are much more aware of like where those special interests are and how they play a role. And then now people are like, well, does that go across like not only legislative but in the judicial? Does that also go into the executive? Like, where are all these special? Are they all over the place? Like, how deep are they ingrained into the system? And can we create measures that will prevent them from doing like from unduly influencing the people that are supposed to represent us? And I think these kinds of stress tests are good because yes, there are going to be some scary potential elements that can come out of them. And the hope, in my view, my hope is that the people will see where there are cracks and there are potential issues of um, undue power, undue influence in power, in the power elements that exist in three branches, and with our voices be able to identify, hey, listen, we need to make changes here. It's really up to us to make those changes.
Well, I guess my question to that would be is that, like, I don't think it's any secret that there's special interest and that there's special interest in our government and legislature that is counterintuitive to the best interest of everyday Americans.
I would argue that most people most people, not all people, most people who are not really paying attention would not necessarily call our government like an oligarchy. Like,
yeah,
most people would not even know what that term means, or even say, they would say, yeah, there's definitely special interests that are involved, but they wouldn't necessarily call our government, like our country, like oligarchical. They would say, oh, well, we have representatives that we vote in and they work for our best interest. If we don't like them, we vote them out, and blah, 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 not realizing how deep the oligarchical system actually exists within the system. I speak to people all the time about politics, and one of the things that I hear from, especially from people that are like deeply ingrained in their party politics, which is really interesting, is they are of the belief that their party is in the right and their party is justified and doing things that's in the best interest of the people. And I mean, in theory, that's supposed to be the case, but that's not how it plays out.
So do you think that that's the administration's position, that they're trying to, okay, so I guess two-part. Do you feel that it is the administration's position that they're trying to uncover that and bring light to that to the people? And in tandem to that question, do you feel that the administration believes that the money in politics is an issue?
I don't know. And I don't know that I believe either one of those two are the case. I think that Donald Trump has, in my personal position is I don't know that his interest is necessarily for the people or for big business. I think his position is he has an opportunity to create legacy. I think he's at an age where he cares about like his name being forever in the books, the history books. And I think that's what his
number one.
I think that's where he's at in life. Okay. I think he's at a position where he doesn't care what he says. Like, I mean, you know, like look at Grandpa. Yeah. Grandpa don't give a shit. Don't give a shit. Don't give a shit.
He'll tuck in a collarless shirt and a pair of basketball pants.
Yeah, like you know,
with a Velcro shoes. Yeah, walk around like he's the shit.
Yeah. So like, I think he's at an age where he doesn't care. He doesn't care about what people think about him. He don't care. So he has no filter. His filter's gone. He doesn't care about it. So stuff that comes out of his mouth like is just completely unfiltered because of his age, right? I think he cares about like his name being one of the great presidents of the greatest president of the United States that made sweeping change in the United States system. And I think he believes the things that he's doing is going to make a drastic sweeping change into how the United States performs in the world moving forward. Now,
do you think he cares? I mean, this is just your thoughts. Like, I'm definitely not holding you. Do you think that he cares how that sweeping change, what the impacts of that sweeping change are, like the long-term impacts of that, or do you think that he's just more or do you think he's more focused on the legacy of making sweeping radical change that has shook the system?
I think he. I think he. From what I can tell, and I've watched. Obviously, I watch interviews with him, and I've heard about interviews, or not interviews, but just like people sitting with him and having conversations. Like Bill Maher had a sit down with him.
Yeah. Did you watch his? I watched his the Bill Maher show, whatever.
Yeah.
Late Night with Bill Maher, whatever it is, comes on Friday. But I watched his follow up after that. I was actually really looking forward to it. It was a good. It was a good post interview,
and he was really surprised at how. And I've heard this over and over again.
How Trump is personally behind closed doors versus who he is out, which makes a lot of sense because this is the same thing you could say about actors,
correct,
and stuff, right? I mean, you've got your stage persona,
right? And there's theater, right?
Yeah, and then you've got your persona,
correct,
right? So
I mean, and I've heard this over and over again from people who have had. I've never had personal interactions with him, but I've heard from other people who've had personal interactions with him that he's a very humble person. Like he doesn't espouse himself in person, and that he's very easy to talk to, and he's got a sense of humor, and that he seems empathetic towards people, and all that good, like all the things that you don't see in the limelight.
Yeah.
He's like this other person. Like, who are you talking about? But that's what I hear. Like from
I've heard that before.
You know what I'm saying?
I've heard that multiple times.
That people, he's so caring, he's so loving, and
the challenge with that, I mean, outside of Bill Maher, is that a lot of the people who have talked, I feel like that I've heard espouse that happen to be in the Republican Party or on that side, which just, and I'm not using that as but it just like from the public persona, just kind of like discredits that position.
Yeah, but here's the thing:
because it's affiliate, like, oh, of course you're going to say that.
Yeah, but you have to remember, like,
part of the party.
Bill Maher is like
he's a libertarian.
Well, he is also, he doesn't care about
he doesn't.
Party affiliations.
Yeah, he's been ostracized by the left.
Yeah, so I don't think
speaking about the woke.
So anyone who's on the left wouldn't want to do, because that goes against the agenda of the left. So they would probably be like, hey, we don't want to hear about your good dealings with Donald Trump. That goes against our agenda.
Yeah, and he even said that. Well, and that's why I really like listening to Bill Maher.
Yeah,
I also really like listening. I mean, he's pretty far leftist, but I also appreciate listening to Bernie Sanders' positions.
Oh yeah,
because Bernie Sanders, regardless of whether you agree with his position or you think that he's too far left or whatever, he has stayed the course.
Oh yeah,
he's been very staunch in his position.
Yeah, he's not moved.
He hasn't moved, and like I can appreciate. So it's kind of like if you listen to him, like you can use that as kind of like a baseline.
Yeah.
To make in the same thing with Bill Maher.
Bernie Sanders is the same person. And I think that's he's the same person in the public light as he is in private.
Yeah,
he seems to be that way.
Yes.
Like that's if you see him in public, if you met him in private, he'd probably be exactly the same.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
And he's old enough not to give a fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Donald Trump, you don't care no more.
Right. So I think that Donald Trump knows he knows theater. He knows that he's been an actor. He's been on game shows.
Apprentice.
Yeah, he understands that. Right. He knows how to play that game, and I think he plays that on TV, literally, right? I play president on TV, and in his private conversations, he seems to be a different person. I think he has a legitimate interest to do the best he can for the American people. I think that's his position, and that he's doing what he can to create a legacy so that America will ultimately have a better outlook looking forward. I think that's what he cares about. Whether he's doing it the right way, that's the only thing I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a hot mess. I'm like, what the fuck is he doing? But you know what? But
you think the good intention is interesting?
I get.
Or you have the feeling.
I get a sense that he because he cares about legacy, and the only way legacy is going to matter is if the outcome is good. If the outcome is bad, that's a terrible. You don't want to be Hitler. That's a legacy, right? Who wants to have the last name Hitler? No one. You know what I'm saying? So that's a terrible legacy to have. So if you want to have a good legacy, you got to end with good stuff going on. I think he cares about legacy. I think that's all he cares about now. So he's doing these things. He thinks he's doing the right thing. I don't know if it's the right thing. But I think he thinks that this stuff he's doing is the right thing.
So do you think, and we're going completely into speculation now, so this is not based on anything like it's just we're going to storytell right now.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of. So do you think that based on your position that you think that he cares about legacy and a good legacy, a good legacy, right, and where he's at? How do you think that he feels about him? Because I feel that he's very aware, right, of like what you can and can't accomplish in 4 years.
Sure.
Right. So what do you think what are your thoughts, or what do you think his thoughts might be on if a legacy is so important to him? How willingly do you think he is going to be or would be in handing the reins over to somebody else immediately after him when he has no control on whether or not they're going to backtrack on the legacy or go against it, or maybe they're going to fulfill it? But like how receptive do you think behind closed doors, do you think he is with giving up that power if he's trying to build that legacy, especially, and I say also with him, like, being buddied up and giving a lot more credit than any other president really has to some more authoritarian leaders across the globe. Like, I'm just kind of curious, like, what your thoughts are.
Okay. So I think that it's when you say buddied up to other authoritarian leaders, like,
I don't mean buddy. So he gives like he makes comments, and he even did the Hungarian leader, or how they're like a great leader or they do great stuff. And like, I'm not saying that like he's going to be his goal is to be an authoritarian person to the detriment. But I'm just like, from the power perspective, right? Like, to hand that over, like.
You think he's going to fight that? I mean, I
don't know. He fought in the last election.
Yeah, but the last election, he felt, so he went up against Joe Biden, who wasn't a great candidate in the first place, and the votes were close, and he felt he had, in his opinion, more popularity amongst the people than he did. So he was fighting, thinking that he felt like there was a conspiracy against him. And to be fair, if you recall, when he went up against Bernie Sanders, when he went up against Hillary Clinton, right, he saw the conspiracy of what happened with Bernie Sanders when the Democratic Party blacked Bernie Sanders out of all media and put Hillary on the ticket. Like, there's no question as to the Democrat Party doing funny business as it related to Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Like, there's no question about that. So he already saw that. So he suspected that the same thing had happened. Now, whether he was right or not, obviously the numbers do not agree with him.
Yeah.
But that's what he thought. So he was fighting it, thinking that, he was in the right to fight for, staying in the presidency, right? The numbers didn't agree with him. So obviously, he still thinks it's stolen. That's his personal position on it. I mean, I don't know that you're ever going to change that. I mean, the agreement in going into the presidency is that you got 8 years, right?
At most, yeah.
Yeah, you get 8 years. The system will prevent you from doing anything longer unless there's some loophole that I'm not aware of, which the only loophole that I'm aware of is if the only way that he could become president again, which it is possible, but it's a very, very unlikely loophole. The only way that he can become president again is someone else runs for president, right? He runs as vice president. The president, they win, and then that person bows out.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm almost positive there's an amendment in there that says that if you are ineligible to run as president, you cannot run.
Oh, maybe there is. I thought that I was under the impression that was the possibility.
I think that and I have to relook. I don't remember what amendment it is, but that was yes, because they're like, oh, he can run as vice president.
The possibility of him running as a third term is so negligible. Like, it would require we're in the middle of war or whatever the case may be. There's some kind of catastrophic something.
It has to get 60% of the House. It's got to get, and then it's got to get 66% of the state legislature.
It's really difficult.
It's really difficult.
It's so hard.
And I think that the what they were arguing is, because I don't know how the amendment. I think, right, so that's all the interpretation, right? That's where it goes back up to the courts. It's just but it's it says you can't run for.
You can't be elected.
You can't be
elected
Right. So I guess that's where, because technically,
I think that's where the loophole is.
So the loophole is like, okay, so elected. Well,
because
the Speaker of the House is not.
Well, neither is the Vice President.
Elected.
The Vice President's not elected. They're selected.
They're selected, but they're elected by proxy on the ticket.
I guess that's fair. Yeah.
Like they are elected.
I don't know. Going into legal, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if that
well,
counts.
That's why I said this is storytelling. Right? That's what we're talking about. So I guess like if I were to make the argument, it's like, okay, so maybe the argument could be is that he takes the step back and gets elected into Congress.
What are the? I mean,
takes the Speaker of the House.
And then, you know how old he's going to be? Like, what are the chances?
Okay, so I want to loop it because I'm tired of talking about Donald Trump. To be completely honest, I'm tired of talking about just the whole. We've given him way too much airtime, and we've got such a massive audience listening to this. So they're tired of it. I'm kind of curious because I was having this conversation with somebody on the phone with yesterday, kind of talking about term limits.
Yeah,
and I feel like we've kind of talked about this before. I think that we're kind of like on the same position that there needs to be term limits.
Oh, for sure. But it requires Congress to agree to term limits.
Well, I'm just kind of like, so what are your thoughts? So I'll share. I'm going to share my position. I'm going to share like what I think, and then I'd love to hear kind of like what your thoughts are.
Yeah.
Okay. So outside of all of this BS talk about Trump getting a third term, I have had thoughts. I was like, you know what? Maybe having a 3-term presidency may have some benefits, because when you're in a 2-term presidency, you're kind of a lame duck in the first presidency. Like there's only so much that you can do because you're so focused on getting
the second term.
Yeah. Right. So my thoughts are like, if you had a 3-term presidency, and maybe the terms are a little bit shorter, maybe they're 3-year terms instead. But if you have a 3-term presidency, then maybe you have a slight lame duck presidency in your first term. But then if you win the second term, you've gotten so much, like
you got some of the foundational
stuff. You can take more aggressive actions in moving stuff in your second term, because while you're still worried about getting a third term, you've got more. You've got some time, and you've got credence behind you. Like, hey, I did this my first term. You elected me the second term, and now I can be a little bit more aggressive and get some things moving in the second. And then there's a higher likelihood I might get elected in the third term, right? So I feel like that could make for stronger presidencies, right? As far as like things actually getting
right, because they can see them through,
right? And then you've got Congress, who's kind of the checks and balances on that also has its alternating terms, right? So like if the people really don't like that from a legislative, there's that check.
Yeah.
So, and then I think that whatever the term is, I think that the congressional and Senate terms should be 1 term longer than that, right? Because it needs to be, I don't think that if you're only going to we're just 2-term presidency. So I think that Congress should be limited to, because what do they serve? They serve 4 years, right? Congress, Senate serves 6 years.
Yeah, Senate serves 6 years. Congress serves 2 years.
They have 2-year terms.
Yeah.
So I think that like it would be, if they can serve 2-year terms,
which I think is too short.
Yeah, I think that the term should be longer and offset from the presidential term. So how midterms are, right? So if the president took power this year, the Congress should be up for election in 2027. Or it should be up for election in 2026 to take office in 2027, right? It should be
kind of like midterms, which they kind of do.
They kind of do that, but sometimes the midterms and the presidency
are the same.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be, or maybe even do 3-year terms, right? So that it's always staggered, and then maybe what would that do? Once every 12 years, it would line up with the presidency, but it would give some staggeredness.
So the challenge with that is the voting process. People tend to come out for presidential elections, but they don't tend to come out for congressional or Senate elections.
Sure. And I would say that could be a short-term thing, but then I would argue that would give more focus on the congressional and Senate elections, where, in my opinion, is where more of the focus from average day Americans really need to be. Everybody puts so much credence and importance on the presidential election. Right. And I'm not saying that it's not important, but I would argue that if if you were to ask me if you could only take part in one election just because of your time commitment or your bandwidth of focus, I would argue it needs to be in your congressional and or Senate elections.
That's fair.
Right? So I'd say it's like, okay, so if it's two, if it was if it was 2 years, so it's like, all right, so 3-year terms, which means that it would line up with the presidency every 3 years. So every 12 years. So every 12 years, you'd be voting for a president and you'd be voting for
Congress.
But then there would be some Congress people who were there for 3 years who are now not up for re-election. So like now you've got to
put in a new person.
You got to put in a new person, right? And then on the flip side of that, and then for like the Senate would be 12 years. I'd say, okay, well maybe the Senate should not be 6 years, maybe it should be 5 years, and it should be 3-year term. That way everything is always staggered on itself. So you're never voting in. There's always the checks and balances from the upcoming election.
Yeah.
With representatives from different parts of the government.
The logistics of that may be a little bit challenging just because you have so many different elections on different years. Like the logistics of that would be, because I mean, you're getting the whole country to kind of like.
Yeah, maybe you'll have less participation.
Yeah.
Because of.
And I mean, just the cost of elections would also go up because you'd have more elections more often because they're all staggered.
Yeah, no, you'd have, if you had, so right now you've got 6 elections every 4 years at minimum, sometimes 7 if Senate comes in, right? So let's call it 7 elections every 4 years. If you've got a presidency who's doing 4 years, that's 1 election every 4 years. And then if you do, if you make congressional elections terms every 3 years, then that's only 2 elections in the 4-year period. And then if you've got 5 years for Senate, that's still only 1 term. That's still only 1 additional election every 5 years. Then you actually have 3 elections every 5 years.
There was 2 in there.
Why?
2 congressional, 4 elections.
Yes, so 4 elections. Whereas right now we've got the presidential election, 2 congressional elections, and then a Senate election. So it's still the same. It's still the same.
Yeah, but the presidential election and the Senate elections tend to fall on, at least the congressional elections will fall on.
Okay, so then let's say then there's only 3 elections that are occurring. So we're adding 1 additional election.
Right, which is already hard to get people out for the 3. Especially when you're talking about congressional and Senate level. Right? Like those midterm elections are usually just your traditional Republican and
well, then maybe you keep
traditional
Democrats. Maybe you keep that and you just put the term. So maybe you just keep that. And the term limits I think are important. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on kind of like how term limits could work on that, and then I'm also curious on your thoughts on eligibility limits. So there's minimum eligibility limits. Like you got to be 32. Is it 32 or 36 to be the president?
36.
36 to be a president, but there's no upper limit. Same thing with like Congress.
Correct.
Like, in my opinion, I don't think that Donald Trump, I don't think that Joe Biden should be eligible to hold the office of the presidency. Even the Chuck Schumers and Nancy Pelosi's are in Congress, because it was different. We didn't have those upper bounds, like at the birth of our country.
Yeah. They died way earlier.
Fucking lived that long, right? But one of the concerns that I was like, we've got like these people. Not only have they been built career politicians, but they're 70, 80 years old, and they're overseeing huge bills, policies, and stuff across arguably what could be like 5 generations below them. Like, and how in touch really can they be with the populace of the country? So
I'm
just curious what you're
I would say that as it relates to age, I think that what I would argue is I don't have a problem with someone who's older being in that position.
Okay.
What I would say is that once you hit maybe a certain age, there is some kind of cognitive test that may be required of you in order for you to run for the office.
Okay.
Right? because there are plenty of people that are older that their cognitive ability is perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other older people that are not. There are young people whose cognitive ability is not great, right? But they don't, age is not the reason, maybe some other thing, right?
Sure.
So I would say as long as they have the cognitive ability, I don't have a problem with that. Now, with regard to being in touch, that goes back, they're elected.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not in touch and the people are still voting them in, that's not their fault.
Mm-hmm.
The people are voting them into office. Like if the people don't feel like this person represents their interest, then they need to remove them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is a people problem. The not in touch that's a people problem. That's not their fault.
Fair point.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if they're not in touch and people are still voting them in, then that's the people not paying attention. You need to pay more attention to who you're voting for, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't put that on the politician who's there. Now, with regard to term limits, I do think term limits are a critical component. I do think it's important to have term limits. I think career politicians in a specific role is a problem. Now, I don't have a problem if someone's a congressman and they want to, or a congresswoman, and they want to be, let's say the term limit is, 8 years or 12 years or whatever. And then after that, they want to go become a senator. And then after that, they want to do something. Like, I don't have a problem with you hopping around the different, legislative and judicial and executive. That doesn't bother me. But like, I do feel like having those term limits are important because, even if you have someone who's really, really good, like Bernie Sanders is someone who's probably, even though you don't agree with his politics, he's consistent. He's been consistent since the beginning. So like, he's a
rare breed.
He's a rare person, right? Like his whole term probably all looks the same, and he doesn't strike me as the kind of person who was sold out. I don't know for sure, but doesn't strike me as that kind of person, right? Who's been bought out or easily manipulated. But, the term limit is to protect against those people who may have been. Mm-hmm. And whenever you're doing any kind of limitations, restrictions, barriers, anything like that, the purpose of that is to protect against the potential for negative things to happen. So, for example, people are like up in arms about, we were talking earlier about immigration, right? And whether or not we should have a stricter border policies, and that most people come in the country, they're not actual like criminals per se. They're just trying to find a better life. They're doing a criminal activity to get in the country, which is the problem, but they themselves are just families trying to find a better life for themselves. We should try to find ways to give them amnesty or find faster path or whatever the case may be. The problem is that if we don't know who they are, right? Even if you have 1 million people that are good people, it's the 10,000 people that are not good people that are the problem. And you have to defend against the 10,000 people, even if that means keeping the 1 million people out. You know what I mean? So any kind of barrier that you put in is to defend against a minority of people that can ultimately do a lot of good, a lot of harm. A lot of harm, right? So I think that with term limits, that is in my view a safeguard against someone who's been bought, who's basically taken. Because then the thing is that let's say that person's been bought, if they only got like a term limit, once their limit's done, whoever bought them now has to convince the next person to do the same thing, and it's much more work to have like an oligarchical system, right? A system that's basically ousted by corporate interest, because that every time a new person comes in, the corporation now has to spend more money to kind of get in there, assuming money stays in the system.
So I feel like this is a chicken. We're looking for chicken or the egg question, but it's like if that's the position, right? Like the safeguard is to make sure that they're not bought.
Well, it's not to make sure they're not bought.
Just that if those people happen, that you're just in a constant rotation of stuff.
So new people.
A question that I would ask is, let's assume somebody was bought by special interest. But the people keep electing them.
Yeah.
So where does the problem lie then? Is the problem in the fact that they're bought and they're just doing this stuff, or is the problem in that they're bought and they've been manipulating their constituents through messaging to continue to support them for, like, I'm going to say, a nefarious reason? or is the problem the special interest that's funding it, or is the problem the people who are supporting it, right? Because your position on
age,
the presidency and age and their ability to relate is more of a people problem.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who are electing. So using that same logic of thinking, like, where's that problem? Like, where do you see that problem?
So I would say that that's a layered problem, right? The special interest is definitely a part of the problem. If the politician is really good and they're able to convince their constituents that they're not bought and that they're doing stuff that's in the people's favor, then there's only so much that the people will believe them. Yeah. Right now, it is incumbent on the population to try to see, like, what are they doing? Yeah. How are they voting? What kind of activities are they doing to be able to ensure that they're doing things that are going to be in the best interest of the people? Right. And some of that, if the politician's really good, sometimes what they'll do is they'll do a few small things to show, hey, look what I'm doing for you, and then they'll still do this other thing that's going to be for special interests. So I think it's a layered problem, because if the people have been swindled, like, it's hard to put it too much on the people, right? Because they've been swindled into believing a certain thing. It is, to your point, I do think that there's certainly a component in there that the people should try to be paying attention to. Yeah. Most people don't have the time. Yeah. Right. Yeah, we talk about that. Yeah. Right. So that's a little bit of a difficulty there, and it's a little easier for a person to recognize, this older person who's completely out of touch than someone who's at least closer to their age. That even if they're not necessarily, they know how to talk to them, right? To be able to engage and maybe do some things for them. So it's a little easier for them. I still think money is the problem, and we're on the same page on that. Yeah. I just kind of wanted to. It was a thought that literally popped up when you're talking about it. I wanted to see kind of like how you saw. Well, again, I think there are a couple of things I think that would be helpful, is that if there is special interest involved, because right now we can't take money out, but what we can do is we can document where money's coming from, and there are places that you can find where money's coming from. If people were more aware of those sources of where money's coming from and were willing to take, like, I feel like there should be a more clarity as to where a politician is getting their funding from. Like, I think there should be almost like a disclosure of where money's coming from. So, like, well, they do have to disclose that unless it's like coming from like a super PAC or something, right? Like, somehow I don't know the details on how that creates the veil of anonymity. But then, I mean, to your point, I mean, even if we did that, like, are people really going to look at it? Yeah, are they able to pay attention? Right? Then we got to lean on the trust of the people who we look up to, whether that's somebody on a podcast, or whether that's somebody on the news, or who's going to be filtering, looking through that information, coming through that, and then presenting that to us. And then the question then becomes, is like, okay, well, then we're just back in the whole debate on whether or not they're sharing this information. So I think vice versa. This is somewhere where I think the Electoral College could probably play a bigger role, right? So people that have concerns about the Electoral College, and like, oh, well, if I vote, it's really not my vote. The Electoral College is ultimately who votes for the representative, right? That's at the end of the day. That they're looking for electoral votes. Like, I feel like that's where Electoral College could play a role. If you can find a way for the Electoral College to be the person who's doing that homework and then sharing that with the people, like, that's then the way that they can get people to understand what each person's interests are, and like where money, like, how are they being funded, like, and I don't know if that's the right answer, but I'm just trying to think actively now. Like, if the Electoral College, is part of their responsibility was to provide clarity on, like, where can you get information on all the people that are on the ticket, and where is money for each of these candidates, where is the money coming from?
Mhm.
And their responsibility was essentially to report on that to the people so that the people could then make a decision, right, on how to vote. And then the way it's supposed to work is the people make a vote, the Electoral College looks at that vote, and they make an assessment as to whether or not that's going to be the best direction to go in. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the Electoral College votes in the same direction as the people vote in most cases. So then that way we have an Electoral College that's very representative of the people. Now that doesn't always happen.
Yeah. So I mean, I've got concerns around the Electoral College, but I also understand the Electoral College. So two-part question for you. I think it's like Maryland. There's a few states that divvy up their electoral votes based on the popular vote.
Uh-huh.
I'm almost positive. I think there's like one or two. It's got to be up in the
It's
Northeast.
not all or nothing.
It's not an all or nothing.
Correct.
So my question to you is, and I don't want to take away from the sovereignty of the states, right? So we're not going to say this is what you need to do, but I'm just kind of like your perspective. Do you think that the electoral colleges, do you think it is more reflective for the electoral college's votes to be cast as I'm going to call it a weighted percentage of the popular vote of the state, or if the popular vote of the state is
one way or the other?
They cast all the votes. That's my first question.
I mean, that's really so.
And then that'll get me into gerrymandering and district.
Yeah. So this goes back to when you said, "Oh, I don't want to take away from the sovereignty of the state." I think that is a specific thing we have to address, because the sovereignty of the states is how that is ultimately identified, right? So we have to remember that we are a collective of sovereign states working together as a nation.
And so I want to precedent this is like, I'm not saying, I don't want to frame this in a way of like how the states need to be ran. I guess I'm just curious on like if the sovereignty of the state wasn't there, how do you feel? What do you feel is just the most? Do you have a feeling one way or the other on what would be best reflective of the population?
I think that's a tough question to answer, because the sovereignty of the states is the point.
Okay.
Right? If you don't have the sovereignty of the states, then what's the point of the states making a decision as to who's going to become president of the United States? The sovereignty of the states is the point of the Electoral College, so that each state is represented.
Yes, they are representative, and they have a representative amount of votes per the population of the state. So, but
if you don't have the sovereignty of the states, then it really would go back. You could make a case. You can make a reasonable case. If you don't have the sovereignty of the states, you can make a case that it should go based on the local population, and electoral districts should vote whatever their population says. That would be a reasonable case to make.
Per the state, though.
Why would it matter? There's no sovereignty.
What do you mean? Why would it?
Why would it matter per state? Because you're doing it based on population. If the sovereignty of the states doesn't matter, then the per state doesn't matter.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So let's just like we're just assuming that
if the country was all one country.
Yeah. If the country was all one country, right?
And no states existed. How would electoral colleges work across different populations? Because that's essentially what it is. They're just electoral districts. It doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter if a state existed or not if sovereignty didn't matter for the state. You just create your district in the population center of what, you carve up your area into an electoral district. Why would the states matter?
Well, you'd still have, and I'm going to say this with caution because I'm still processing. I'm still trying to make sure I fully understand, because it's fully understand what you were saying. But Florida, okay, so let's use Florida because we're in Florida. We have 26 electoral votes, right? Or 27?
I don't remember.
I'm going to call it I feel like I said 26 first. So
Okay.
first assumption.
Go with that.
We'll go with 26. So we've got 26 electoral votes for our state. All right. I don't understand, I guess, how the sovereignty of the state becomes moot if the state is given X amount electoral votes, and then those electoral votes are reflective among the popular vote of the state. Unless you're saying that the sovereignty of the state and being able to make the decision on is your argument or position is that the sovereignty of the specific benefit of the sovereignty of the state is how they cast those votes.
Correct.
That's what you're okay.
Yes.
So then that makes sense. Okay.
That's why Maryland does it differently than Florida.
I can agree with
does.
that.
Yeah.
So then what are your thoughts on, and yes, this is going to go back into the sovereignty of the states, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get over like gerrymandering, right? The redistricting of things, because like I'm not opposed to redistricting, right? I think that my issue is that redistricting, if I'm correct, redistricting is when it comes time to redistrict, is the power lies with the legislature.
Correct.
And it's just like, I feel like, and then you've got the legislature who, particularly in Florida, right? Because we're just going to go on, I guess, we're not a purple state, right?
Yeah.
Time we got to get out of here.
We don't have to get out of
here. I do need a prospect. So if you're looking to buy or sell, so it's different in a purple state, right? Because it's a more balanced. I don't want to say it's more balanced,
yeah,
but
we used to be a purple state.
We used to be a purple state.
Yeah.
That was long ago. That was pre-Gore, right? Pre-Gore Bush.
No, I mean, I would say prior to
because that was the last close. That was the last presidential election issue that I feel like was as closely related to what happened in 2020.
Yes, but I think we've been we've been relatively purple probably until very recently. I would say over the last two election cycles.
Really? I don't think so.
But before the last two election cycles, I think I would say, you know what, arguably you can say in 2016, we really established ourselves as a red state.
I would argue that we weren't even a purple state pre-Obama.
I don't know about that.
I'm going to relook at that. Okay, well, anyway, we're so good at detracting ourselves. So particularly in like just using Florida's case, because we're a very red state.
Mm-hmm. We're not a very red state. We're leaning
red state. Okay, but our legislature is predominantly red. I guess my concern is this is whether or not it's the state's leaning red or the state's leaning blue. But I feel like when it comes down to redistricting, I almost feel like it should be an independent body comprised of
the various parties
mm-hmm. that are redistricting, because you can make the argument, well, the party who's redistricting is that is representative of the populace based on election, and I get that, but the long-term problems that I see with that is similar to the argument that was made with like all of the illegal immigrants coming in and flooding the purple state so that it leans one way, and
mm-hmm.
then now we have no more swing states, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the argument. So it's like I feel like the same thing could be said about the redistricting and gerrymandering with that basis, because if you've got a super left or right leaning state and it comes and the Congress is comprised of it, the legislature is comprised of that, and then they redistrict and redraw the lines, they're going to be redrawing and redistricting the lines such that is in favor of that party maintaining power from the voting perspective. Mm-hmm. And so then, like, how do you get yourself back out of that? Mm-hmm. Is kind of a thing. So it's like, I guess I'm not opposed to the Electoral College, and I'm not even saying that the popular vote, it needs to be split. I think the Electoral College is good and it gives state sovereignty, but At the same time, I feel like there's not a checks and balance mechanism on the gerrymandering.
I think gerrymandering is a problem, and I don't know what the answer is. To be fair, I don't think that what you're suggesting sounds like a bad idea, where you get people from the various parties that exist in that particular district have a say in where those lines are drawn. It ultimately will need to come down to one person making the line. So I don't know how you would necessarily do that, but I mean, maybe there's some way.
I would think that it would be like a committee, and
like
then
they negotiate through.
Yeah, they negotiate through, and it comes in meeting of the minds. It's maybe the people on the left are like, hey, it becomes a game of risk, right?
I
strategy.
Well,
right?
What happens if they don't agree? Someone has to come in and say, okay, well, this is what we're going to say. So there has to still be a someone that, in the event that they don't come to an agreement on where the districts are going to lie, there has got to be at least some system in place that identifies what that is. And because that's not numerical, it's literally lines drawn on a paper, you may have to have an actual person that just says, okay, I'm going to be making an executive call on where this line is going to be based on the arguments from both sides or whatever they decide, right? There's going to have to be like an arbiter somewhere. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that could be some.
Well, I think like that. So first, I mean, just in thought, right? I would say, first of all, it needs to be a committee of odd people, right?
When you say odd people, what do you mean?
Like people who just look odd. No, just an odd number of people.
Okay.
Right. So it'd be like, so I see it as like a two-step process. You're going to have, say, you have 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. And the first step of this is this committee creating nominations or finding
a fourth,
the 7th person. Yeah. And they have to come to agreement on who that 7th person is. Right? So it's going to be reflective of, it would be kind of like the House, I guess the House Speaker or whatever, but typically the party who controls it is going to be, whoever it is. And maybe that person ends up becoming an independent, right? Maybe it's comprised of 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and an independent, right? If you just want to make it, or it's the 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, they have to come to an agreement on who that 7th.
I mean, I think in theory that sounds great. I just don't know how well that would play out because you still got to come to an agreement, right? And if they don't come to an agreement, then what happens?
Personally, I mean, just off the cuff, I'd say, well, then there is no redistricting. The lines stay the same. It's either coming to an agreement on redistricting, or the districts stay the same and the status quo stays the same. And then the parties have to figure out how to.
You're still going to have manipulation, though, because let's say that the redistricting favors Republicans, right? And then
yes, it may the current map may favor Republicans, but it's not going to further favor Republicans by redrawing or Democrats, or it's not going to continue facilitating a drawing of a map that is going to.
Yeah, but what if the
proliferate that particular party?
So typically redistricting happens when let's say Democrats feel like a certain district would be more favorable for them. And let's say Republicans will take that because they know it would be more favorable for them. And they'll take that knowing that they're still going to win because they have all these Republicans
other districts
on this other portion of the district.
Yeah.
Right. So if that's the case, for example, and then you have this committee that's supposed to be for redistricting lines, and the Democrats feel like it's unfavorable for them and they want to redistrict, when would they be able to redistrict? They would never, because the Republicans could always just hold it hostage.
Say that to me one more. Say that last part.
If the Democrats, as an example, if the Democrats wanted to redistrict this line, because they know that by redistricting this line, this would be more favorable for them. There's a lot of their constituents are here, and on the other side of the train tracks, let's say, is all of the Republicans, right? And the reason why these guys don't have a voice is because there's so many Republicans on this portion of the district. So this portion of Democrats get really no say because they're always outvoted because there's just so many more Republicans over here. If the Democrats wanted to capture some of these guys through redistricting, when would they be able to do that? They would never be able to do that because the Republicans would hold that hostage because we can't agree on a committee member. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, but they could just hold the line.
They just hold the line. They say, oh, well, we can't agree on a committee member, so then we can't redistrict. So we're going to keep the district more favorable to us. Thank you and goodbye. You see what I'm saying? Like you still need someone that, like there still needs to be someone who identifies, who says, hey, this is what we're going to do. You know what I mean? And I mean, I would say that the seventh person, if you're going to go 7 people deep, let's say, then, you know, maybe that is an alternating person from different parties that represent the area. Sometimes it'll be Republicans, sometimes it'll be Democrats, sometimes it'll be a Libertarian, sometimes it'll be the Green Party person, sometimes it'll be an independent. But the seventh person is always like alternate. It can never be the same party, is what I guess my point.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have districts between Republicans and Democrats, but you know, the seventh person or the odd person out you'd always have to have one, and it would always be alternating. Sometimes it will be a Republican, and then Republicans have 4 versus 3.
Oh, maybe. Well, then, I mean, just if we're just shooting, maybe it's just using the seventh person. Maybe it's 3 Republicans. They get to choose between their party. 3 Democrats. They get to choose between their party, and then the independent party gets to pick one of their people from the independents. And then, like, so none of them have a say on who's sitting on the committee outside of the people who are in their party.
Yeah, but you'd have to include all parties.
Right. So, fuck, there's so many parties. How many parties?
Exactly. Problem. See the problem? It gets worse. It just continues to get worse. So maybe there's qualifiers for what parties get included and blah, 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 right? You know, so there's all kinds of different logistical challenges that you got to deal with.
Right. So, and I would say, well, you know, we're talking about this, and I'm not saying you're taking the position that there's just logistical challenges. We can't do it. But I feel like the fact that there's logistical challenge, I think that sometimes we use those as reasons as to why not to do things or why not to look into things, as opposed to.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying.
I know you're not saying
what you're suggesting may be a logistical challenge. I think what might be better is to
running a country is a logistical
challenge. Yeah, agreed.
Let alone a state.
I mean, you know, maybe there is just a sort of non-partisan body that their responsibility is to do that, where they are responsible for bringing in people from different political affiliations, and then they're responsible for districting the state. The problem with that is that, you know, people might argue, well, that's not representative of my district, or that, like kind of what you were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't know if there's another way to do that where there's not funny business happening, right? And again, funny business can still happen. You never know.
I'm curious, like where did redistricting come from? Is that a constitutional thing?
No, that's a political strategy.
That's a political strategy that just all states happen to have adopted.
Yeah, because it's advantageous for the various, depending on what party you're in, like to identify like how you can get more votes and and there's no rules against it, right? Against redistricting, because usually it's based on population and where people have moved to, and there's all kinds of reasons why you might want to redistrict for this reason or that reason. So,
and there's no guidelines on redistricting. So
I'm sure there are.
Well, I'm just saying, like, is it not like what do you just like each district? Because not each district has the same population, right?
No.
Or
not that I am aware of. I'm not sure what the guidelines are in redistricting. I'd have to look into that. I'm not really certain.
I mean, I can see the reason why you wouldn't want to take it away, because there's consequences to taking that stuff away, right?
Yeah.
There's consequences with keeping it away. So it's kind of like, you know, pick your poison kind of thing. Like,
yeah. Again, this goes back to like it's a strategy utilized by each party to kind of, you know, bolster their party's position in governance.
And it only becomes a problem when
it disenfranchises people.
When you lean one way or the other, right? But then we could use that as case studies, right? The purple states, they still manage to redistrict, and typically they've got like split Congress, split legislature, right? So to think that we couldn't do that through independent committee that's split.
Remember, it does depend on the population. If the population tends to lean one way or the other, you're not going to have a purple state.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you have a population that's heavily Democrat or heavily Republican, turn that into a purple state is unfair to the population of Republicans that are there. If it's a Republican state, for example.
I don't know if you're necessarily trying to turn it into a. I think that kind of is a misnomer. It's like the purpose is not to turn it into a purple state. I feel like the purpose is to prevent it from getting too far to one extreme that it can never come back from it.
But again, that's the purpose of having that's why I think the sovereignty of the states matters, right? Because it's not necessarily people voting for the president; it's people voting on behalf of the state, and then the state making a vote towards who's going to be president. Like the people who represent, like people are voting in the state, and then the state making a decision as to what direction that the state, based on what the people's votes are, what direction the state wants to go as it relates to national elections.
But you don't think that the Electoral College disenfranchises people across the nation who like don't have as many electoral votes? So then like the people who are running don't spend time in on those places, and so they become underrepresented.
There's no way to get away from that. There's no population that's going to be perfectly represented everywhere. Right. So you're always going to have disenfranchised people. Like that's always going to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, you want to try to do your best to limit that, but it's really at the state level. It's up to the state to determine.
Maybe the Electoral College, the vote should be what the votes are, and we should throw it into a fucking bingo tosser, and then like each state, it's like a draft, and you got to pick the ball for how many fucking votes you're going to get.
Yeah.
For that election cycle.
That's funny.
That would fucking throw the country into some sort of ridiculousness.
Yeah.
But I'm just picturing that as a fun game show.
Turn the whole voting process into a game show.
So we'll do a draft first. New York,
Yeah.
you get draft pick number 1. Just like, oh that's my gosh. Funny. Then they start trading. Hey, we'll give you our draft pick this year.
Right.
We want your number 1 pick next year. It's like, oh my gosh.
That's crazy. And on that note, I think that's a good time for us to wrap it up.
Getting delirious over here.
All right. Anyways, so yeah, that's been our conversation today. I appreciate you guys watching. If you like what you're hearing or you have any comments on things that we're talking about, please make sure you comment below. We'd love to hear any thoughts that you might have, or if you have anything that you want us to kind of chat about. We're just two guys talking about, what's going on in politics and trying to understand all the different nuances that exist. And it's a hot, heavy mess. And we're just trying to make some sense of it. And it's not easy. So anyways, we appreciate you guys watching. If you like what you're watching, please like, please share. Make sure you tell all your friends and subscribe. We'd love to see you again. Take care.
Peace. Later.
All right.